And this is the Charlotte City Council November 2nd Council Strategy Session. This is a time where we actually have discussion and conversation about the issues and items coming before the City Council in the next several months. We have several special reports tonight, and we're going to cover those. But first, before we do that, I'd like to have the council members introduce themselves, and we'll start with the Mayor Pro Tem.
Good evening, everyone. Julie Eiselt, Mayor Pro Tem and serving at large.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Tarek Bakari, District 6.
I'm Joe Biden, and I'd like to remind everybody to go vote tomorrow.
Wow. Wildly inappropriate.
Now, Mr. Eggleston.
And now
would
for
you
the record.
introduce yourself?
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
All right, we have several members that are joining us virtually. If we could have those members introduce themselves.
Dimple Archibald.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Newton, District 5.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Has Mr. Winston joined us yet?
Cici Ramirez, District 6.
That's okay. All right, I'm looking for Mr. Winston. Has he joined us yet, Ms. Jackson? Mr. Mitchell will not be here. He's not feeling well tonight, and so I believe that's everyone, and I am Vi Lyles, and I serve as mayor. We tonight will have first one of our committees that were held by citizens. And I believe all of those citizens are on, but more importantly, I'd like to introduce Amy Peacock, who is the co-chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee on Governance. I wanted to say this is really important because 2 years ago, the Charlotte City Council started talking about how our government was structured and what do we need to do to be effective in the upcoming future, near and far, long. And we put it off after a vote of the council that we weren't able to move forward on, and said, let's get a team of people that would have really deep discussions and bring to us some recommendations. And I want to thank Amy Peacock for her leadership there. I also want to recognize that her co-leader, Cindy Patterson, unfortunately due to the loss and illness and loss of her husband, was not able to finish out the task. But Cindy, we are thinking about you and know that you made the right choice in the way that you chose to spend your time. So with that, I don't think that Amy needs much introduction to all of us. So I'd like to invite Amy Peacock to the podium to give the report of the Citizens Advisory Committee on Governance.
Thank you. Mayor Lyles, whoops. Okay. Well, we've been working together for 6 months. We had a great committee and a great charge from our mayor. Again, my name is Amy Peacock. We were called the Citizens Advisory Council on Governance, AKA the CACG. And it's an honor to be here to represent our stellar committee. And we just want to thank each of them. I know some of them are on WebEx, but really this was a huge team effort, and we couldn't have done it without each other. We are grateful to Mayor Lyles and Pro Tem Mayor Eiselt for the opportunity to take part in this initiative. And of course, we are so thankful for Patrick Baker and Lauren Livingston and the Strategy and Budget Department, the Department of Health and Human Resources, and the Department of Planning, Design, and Development for all their support. You would not believe how much data we asked for. So here we are. The charge that we had from Mayor Lyles was for us to consider and make recommendations on the following. 1, Mayor and City Council terms of office, including length of terms, as well as method of implementation. 2, Mayor and City Council full or part-time positions and related compensation. And 3, updated policy guidelines and principles for the City Council redistricting resulting from the upcoming results of the 2020 census. Thank you, Wendy. Okay, here you can see our great committee. I'm assuming some of you know them. Really, we had a team of people that were from all the districts, all age groups, very diverse, and just, we couldn't have gotten along better, Democrat, Republican, or unaffiliated. And at the direction of Mayor Lyles and Mayor Pro Tem Isolt, we reviewed the current structure of the Charlotte City Council. We examined Charlotte's growth trends and current government structure, analyzed the government structure of peer cities, and developed recommendations to provide to City Council on the elected official structure of government that would best meet the current and future needs of Charlotte residents. Specifically, Wendy, you want to turn the next slide? Thank you. Well, to back up a little bit, we evaluated the length of City Council terms of office and what term length would enable elected officials to best serve the city and its residents. We looked at compensation for elected officials and what level of compensation would be adequate to encourage interested members of the public to run for office. Which election method, either partisan or nonpartisan, would best benefit the community, and what criteria for City Council districts would ensure adequate representation of Charlotte's residents. Okay, methodology. Our committee started meeting in March, but because of COVID, it was kind of a bumpy road, so we officially got started on June 25th, 2020, and requested an incredible amount of information concerning methods of election, compensation, and length of terms for cities comparable to Charlotte and for Charlotte, North Carolina jurisdictions. The main source of our data included surveys of Charlotte's top 20 peer cities, surveys of U.S. top council manager governments, data from the Institute of Government on all cities in North Carolina looking at jurisdictions with populations over 50,000. And data from Mecklenburg Board of Elections on City of Charlotte's historical records. Public feedback. We did our best to get public feedback, virtual public participation in light of these virtual meetings we've had to do due to COVID-19. The committee broadcast their meetings on the city's YouTube channel and the city's government channel, and had an email for the public to submit questions and comments to the committee. And then we did a survey. And from September 21 to October 2nd, the committee distributed a survey to solicit public feedback and encourage public participation in this conversation. The survey was distributed to the city boards and commission members, to neighborhood organization listservs, to staff, and publicized on the city's social media platforms, as well as the city's website homepage. And I know several committee members shared it. Some council people shared it. So the good news is we got 681 survey responses and 179 individual comments. So that should be interesting reading for y'all. As a committee, we recommend that you encourage, as you analyze this, you encourage public input as much as you can. I don't know how long the COVID is going to last, but we still need to engage the public's input. All right. Recommendations. So as a committee, the overarching result we want to have is more representation for Charlotte and to help Charlotte's mayor and city council to manage their elected office and engage with citizens most efficiently while they are serving. Additionally, we good qualified people are able to run for office and do not want to dissuade the best and brightest from running for elected office and representing our community. Our discussion around Charge 1, which is terms of office, can be found on pages 6 through 9 on the committee's final report, and our recommendations can be found on page 13. In Charlotte, elected officials currently serve 2-year non-staggered terms with no term limits. Charlotte and Mecklenburg County also have partisan elections. We are recommending, with a vote of 8-3, for a 4-year term. With a vote for 10-1, we are recommending those are staggered terms, and with term limits with a vote of 10-1. So No jurisdiction in North Carolina has term limits. This would require certain legislation with a General Assembly in Raleigh. The majority of the committee said this longer term limit or longer term would allow the Charlotte City Council to work more collaboratively and establish a body with longer term decision-making in mind, offer more time for council to understand the job and avoid election year politics. We are recommending these changes be voted on through a citizens referendum, as overall the committee felt the voters should have a say. The minority noted that the community had voted on similar referendums in the past and they had previously failed. Okay. Wendy, you can turn, okay, there we go, perfect. Okay, compensation. After looking at data on elected officials' compensation for 20 national peer cities, we noticed that the Charlotte mayor ranks pretty low at 18 out of 20 in pay, and the Charlotte City Council ranks 14 out of 20 in pay. The committee recommended unanimously to increase the mayor and Charlotte City Council pay, noting also that an increased pay would encourage more qualified candidates to consider running for office. Our discussion around this charge, too, can be found on pages 9 through 11 on the committee's final report, which you have copies of, and our recommendations in more detail can be found on page 14. Currently, Charlotte Mayor's total compensation is $4,596, which includes expenses, auto, and technology allowances. The committee unanimously recommended to raise the Charlotte Mayor compensation to that of the county's Board of County Commission chair. The total compensation for the Board of County Commission chair is $56,431, including allowances. Currently, the Charlotte City Council total compensation is $33,915, which includes allowances. The committee unanimously recommended to raise the Charlotte City compensation to that of the county's Board of County Commission. The total compensation for the Board of County Commissions is $48,563, which also includes allowances. Thank you, Wendy. Okay, districts. The district question. With the census coming up and Charlotte growing so quickly, this is really to look at. The committee recommends unanimously to increase representation at the district level by increasing to 8 district representatives and by removing 1 at-large seat. So you'd go from 7-4 to 8-3. In light of the 2020 U.S. Census results, the city will draw new council districts, and after looking at 2000 and 2010 criteria for drawing districts, the committee is recommending the following factors be considered in redistricting. And this is in the fourth, or in the highest first order. Districts must have substantially equal population. Districts should be reasonably compact. District boundaries may follow neighborhood boundaries or areas containing residents sharing similar interests. And this is importance in the second order. When possible, districts should have relatively even partisan balance. District boundaries may be drawn to maintain balance between major political parties. District boundaries may follow precinct boundaries. District boundaries may be drawn considering the race of a district residents, as long as race is not the predominant motivating factor. Districts most likely to be impacted by future annexation may be made smaller to minimize the impact of future annexations on future redistricting. And district boundaries may be drawn to avoid contests between incumbents. Got a little more on district. Our discussion around charge 3 can be found on page 11 on the committee's final report, and our recommendations can be found on page 14 and 15. When looking at elected officials' representation of the Charlotte community, the committee considered recommending to add an additional council member to the Charlotte City Council, the maximum allowed by state law. So that would be 12 plus the mayor, which would be 13. This would have added an 8th district seat without removing an at-large seat. However, It would significantly change the relationship between the mayor and the council members, as there would be an even number of council members. The committee recommended 7-4 to keep city council as a 12-member body, 11 members plus the mayor. Currently, according to the District Tool webpage, Charlotte City Council districts have an average population of approximately 112,000 residents. Okay, so next slide. All right, so lots of potential changes. So how do you modify the government structure? Well, according to state law, mayor and council terms may be either 2 or 4 years. And mayor and council terms are not required to be the same. So example, mayor could have a 4-year and council people 2 and vice versa. 4-year council terms may be concurrent or staggered. And council may also consider a partisan or nonpartisan election method. Term limits would, again, require special legislation by the NC General Assembly in Raleigh. So how can government structure be changed? There are 3 avenues. The first one, the General Assembly may amend the charter by local act. 2, the council may amend by ordinance, subject to approval by the voters at a referendum, and that is what the committee recommends, a referendum. The council, 3, the council may amend by ordinance without a referendum. However, someone could go out and get 5,000 signatures on a petition filed within 30 days, and it forces a referendum. And these procedures of modification can be found in the appendix. Next slide. Thank you, Mayor Lyles. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Eisel, and council members who did provide feedback or any context surrounding this. And as I've already thanked, I mean, we could not have done this without staff. They were just amazing. So we have a few committee members on WebEx, and we have all the answers you need. And we have Patrick here with procedural issues or legal issues on questions you may have. So I hope that wasn't too quick. Is there anything, any questions you have about what we found?
We're going to open it up for questions, but I also wanted to recognize, while we have the co-chair, Amy Peacock, Kristen Connor with Keller Williams, Mimi Davis, retired teacher, Christy Long with Wells Fargo, Brandon Pierce with Coca-Cola Consolidated, CeCe Ramirez, who we can see on the web screen right now, Hispanic community leader, Janice Robinson, who is a real force of power, and she's with Cabarrus College, Reverend Eleanor Norman Shell with the Presbytery of Charlotte, Sam Smith Jr. with United Way, Peter Smoshwich with Mower, and Liz Weiner with the Weiner Family Foundation. So I'm grateful for everyone and the time and the attention and the effort. And I do believe, looking at the materials that you have, that the staff really did help out. And I'm glad that they were able to address these things, the questions that would be raised, because you represent the community view and perspective. And this was really, really a good report. So we got a couple of questions. I'm going to recognize Council Member Eggleston and followed by Ms. Watlington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Peacock, for your leadership on this. This is a very thorough presentation y'all put together for us. You mentioned that a majority of the committee recommended that this go to a voter referendum, but you also acknowledged historically voters in Charlotte and more specifically and recently Mecklenburg County have not been favorable to these sort of ballot initiatives. So was there a discussion around that you have some optimism that with a certain amount of education, voters will come around to the idea? Or was it simply that you didn't feel like you felt like this was the only appropriate method to implement this sort of a change, regardless of whether voters would ultimately support it or not?
Well, we thought maybe you'd go up to Raleigh. Really, we felt pretty strongly about, from an 8-3 vote, that this was an important change, and somehow you all could work to make it happen, if you took action on it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I don't know, I have some pessimism around, in fact, until I got in the role I'm in now, I actually voted against four-year terms when the county commission put it forward. I'm going to say that was maybe 7 years ago. So something like 2013, I believe. And I don't think that I appreciated the benefits that it would have for the exact reasons that you said, being able to have more long-term thinking, not having people be in election mode during so much of a percentage of their term. But from the outside looking in, even as a fairly educated observer of local politics at the time, I kind of just looked at it at surface level and thought, well, of course politicians would want longer terms, but why would I want to give them to them? So I think that is probably the right way to go about it, but I also think we need to be prepared to have a pretty robust education campaign, a la what is done for the bonds and other things like that do pass, for people to understand what the benefit to the community is, and that it's not just a benefit to the people in the elected positions. Because I think for a lot of folks, that's what at a quick glance they'll think.
Yeah, I think the communication with the community is going to be important, and when you get out and start talking to people about this, especially if they're currently working and thinking about would they give their time, you'd be surprised what you hear. Now, I think maybe the mood is changing a little bit, I'm not sure. But I think the community dialogue is key.
Thank you.
Ms. Watlington?
+1 to what Councilmember Eggleston just said, I think is going to be key for us to understand. And I think back to 2013, and I too voted against four-year terms. And so I think the question is going to be, what benefit does it provide to the community? I did want to make sure I understood a few things in the recommendations. The first one is I see the method of implementation for four-year terms as citizen referendum, but I don't see that for the rest. Was that intentional, or was your recommendation that we went to referendum for all of the recommendations?
Ms. Watlington, could you repeat the question?
Yes. I see here that citizens referendum is recommended as the method of implementation for four-year terms, but I
Right.
don't see a method of implementation recommended for the rest of the changes. Is that intentional?
Correct, yes. We specifically did a straw vote on that. So if there was going to be four-year terms, we want it to be, go to referendum.
Okay, but for the rest of it then, did you all do a straw vote on those?
We straw voted on every one of these, yeah. So the four-year terms was 8-3.
No, what I'm asking you is, so I see here, citizens referendum, you guys, sounds like you felt strongly that that needed to go to voter referendum. What about nonpartisan elections, increase of compensation, and the makeup of the board? Did you all vote on how those changes should be made, or no?
My understanding, and Patrick, maybe you can chime in here, I believe council can, or is it the board of the election or council that makes this change?
So as it relates to the election method, there is a mechanism whereby the council can do that with I think it's 2 public meetings over a certain period of time, or that could potentially go out to a referendum. I don't recall that we actually discussed that in terms of the referendum. The big issue was the 2 years to 4 years, because I think that we had just had that conversation this council had just 2 years ago in terms of whether or not to do anything, and if so, whether to try to do it as a council or to put it out to referendum. So I think the voter referendum on the 2-year, 4-year terms was already on everyone's mind, which is why it was the first thing to put out there. But in terms of like elected officials' compensation, that's something that you all decide. That's not a voter referendum issue. That's really a part of your budget. And then the district, the representation of districts, that's also something that you all do. That's not something that goes out to voter referendum.
Okay, thank you. And then the next thing is on the nonpartisan elections, I see in the table that the vote is reflected as 8-3, but in the recommendations, I think I saw 6-5. I just want to make sure I know which one is the one.
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry, that is an error. It was 6-5.
Okay, thank you. And then
Yeah, I apologize.
No, you're fine. And then lastly, Down here where you all talked about the compensation of the council, and you specifically said one district rep additional and remove one at-large rep, is that subject to change pending the population change in the census, or was that based on what you thought projected population was going to be?
When we looked at the data about the growth in Charlotte and different districts and how it did the outliers, and then we looked at that, and then we analyzed where are the calls coming for support, what's generating the most business. And that's really how we made the decision. We know probably those places are still going to grow even more. So we weren't thinking what is going to be in the census necessarily. It was really what's going on now in addition to what's happening in the future, what we found out.
So is it possible then, based on the process that you followed, that the districts will still be significantly larger?
What we're actually looking for are smaller districts.
Understood.
Yeah, so however you all decide to work that out, we think it'd be better for the citizens and maybe for the representatives too, to have smaller districts if possible.
Right. Is there let me ask it this way. If we add an additional district rep and remove one at-large rep, is there a number that you all had in mind of target population in the district? It's cute. Okay, so.
Yeah, about 100,000.
So that's based on-
Currently, the average right now is 112,000.
So it's based on the population today. So if we get, I'm just trying to understand, if we get numbers back from the 2020 census, are we going to have to revisit it, or is this already considered?
Well, I think my understanding, and I don't know what's your strategy session, but I heard you all might be creating another committee to really dive into the district issue around how you're going to draw it and that sort of thing. So nothing is in stone yet. Does that answer your question?
Yes, if you remember, I think Mr. Graham raised this as an issue several meetings ago, that we usually appoint a committee of the council, Democrats, Republican districts, all of that, and then the political part then begins to activate, whereas the governance committee has recommended the strategy of like keeping precincts together, making racial balance. There's also an aspect of political balance between parties, unaffiliated, and all of that. So
I'm just asking, is there a possibility that we're going to come back a year from now and say, you know what, we should have added 2 district seats to get to a manageable level versus just 1?
well, I think that the census, the 2 district seats, I think Ms. Peacock said we'd have to go to the state to get that. And anything that we begin to take our destiny and put it in the hand of the legislature is more of a problematic situation. So we could do that if we made a decision about doing that. But I think that they're recommending that the current 12 is the size that would be appropriate.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Oh, okay, so you want to just, I think that's up to us. Yeah, we could just do that. Yes, anything within the configuration of 12.
right, 12 is the statute, we can only have 12.
Right.
So
And we
you
can do it
anyways.
however we wanted within.
Okay, thanks.
I think the community may have talked about this in the 70s, and that's another one. Okay, so the next person is Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. So a commission headed by, I think, Mayor Zbinrud and Gant found years ago that they did not recommend going to 4-year terms because they didn't see any public call for it. Did your group consider that and the position they took then and the question of whether or not there is actually public demand for this move?
We did consider it, and as what Mayor Ganton Bender talked about, I actually talked to Mayor Bender and got his very clearly heard what he thought, even today. But I think as a committee, they're reflective of Charlotte. So with an 8-3 vote, they're thinking along those lines, maybe more so than they were before.
So they were thinking along.
With an 8-3 vote on the committee, 8 for the 4-year terms, and 3 not. That, if we're representative of Charlotte, maybe there has been a change of thinking. I'm not sure on that, but I can tell you on our committee, there were pretty strong feelings about it.
Anyway, the group did take on board that earlier event.
Oh, yeah, we looked at that often.
The salary recommendation, you suggest that we go to the Board of County Commissioners compensation level. So that was a decision they made. Was there any particular reason that you concluded that City Council should receive that particular level of compensation, other than the sort of convenience that it was the same as what those guys got? I mean, what were the sort of thoughts about either being higher or lower than that, for example?
Well, if you look at the data, of our peer cities, the mayors make a considerable more amount of money.
Yes.
I think, and we have it in our, I can tell you which page in a second, but so does City Council. And so we're trying to find some benchmark we could use. So we turned to locally, and we got advised that that may not be a bad place to look, is to at least create balance between the two organizations as a place to start, rather than coming in and say, we want the mayor to make $150,000 and council make $80,000. So we thought, well, let's just start here, because it is an increase, and see how that works.
Okay. In reference to an earlier question, the referendum issue comes up because the state law says that you either have a referendum on changes in the length of terms, or if you don't, there's this 5,000 petition signature that can trigger the requirement that you have one. There are no provisions like that related to your other recommendations, which suggests that we have more latitude to act autonomously if it comes to changing compensation, as did the Board of County Commissioners. I don't think that the idea of trying to proceed without a referendum would make good sense, both because the public would probably want a voice in that, and because you would probably get the petition filed anyway. I can't imagine that 5,000 people wouldn't come together. I had 2,500 people sign a petition objecting to one rezoning petition. So I think we're in a bit of a box on that one, frankly, based on the outcome of the earlier vote. But anyway, we note your recommendation. And then I would just comment that the redistricting thing, as we know from abundant precedent at other levels of government, is a very messy process, usually ends up in court. There's all kinds of packing and other considerations that then start to come into play when it's discussed. And I remember when I ran for office in 2012 for the Board of County Commissioners, they were redistricting the county then, and in the end, the legislature just reached in and drew the map and set aside the outcome of the local process. So we shouldn't underestimate all of the issues that will come up as we approach that, and I think having a commission work on it is a good idea. Thank you.
I have to say, Mr. Driggs, in the entire time that I've been in Charlotte, we've never had a challenge working through with the bipartisan redistricting that's been acceptable to everyone. So I hope that we'll not get to that situation, that we've stopped something that's a pretty good run. All right, I have Mr. Graham, followed by Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Peacock and the committee members for the excellent work on these recommendations. And again, they're just recommendations, so the council has an obligation to review them and to accept what they want and reject others that may not be plausible to them. And just by reviewing them, there's some that I'm really excited about, and there are others that I probably got to go home and sleep on. And so I'm pretty sure at the appropriate time, this council will have a robust conversation in reference to all of them in terms of what fits and what doesn't. One thing I don't think I need to remind my colleagues in the public is that we're now the 15th largest city in the country. And I think our governance structures certainly have not kept up with our growth. And so I think this is a timely exercise, and that whenever we make a decision, I guess I'll ask a question to the mayor in terms of where do we go from here, so she can be prepared to kind of help me answer that question. But once we do have this conversation, I hope that we really take the seriousness of it, because I think we need more than just a tune-up. I think we really need to take a look at ourselves and really make some major structural change in terms of how we operate. I know this was not your charge, but I'm just curious in terms of, as the committee went through all these conversations relating to governance and structure, and was there any conversation in reference to consolidation, or how the conversation or the governance structure of the city and the county kind of overlap, and what does that mean for our community? No, it's not your charge, but I can't believe you guys had this conversation for 5 months, and that conversation never came up.
Thank you. I think we talked about it, well, I know we talked about it a little bit, but we didn't feel that now it wasn't much of an issue in our conversations. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but then we moved on. It wasn't something we got bogged down on or thought we could make a decision about right now.
Simply because it was not your charge, or because?
Well, it wasn't our charge, but it also wasn't really, people weren't focused on this because this alone was enough to
I got you.
work on. But we talked about how it had been brought up before. When you look at the, the information, the data from the past conversations with this, it's clearly been always a topic of conversation, but we didn't dive into it beyond just a little chatter.
Thank you for the work.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. And Amy, thank you and the committee for all your work. I was, as the sort of support council member on this, I'd listened into a number of the meetings, and the data was incredible, all of the data that you all digested and all of the data that Lauren and Patrick's team provided to you. So this is more of a comment. You have the website up on there, and I don't know if people can see it very well, but if the public wants to go to charlottenc.gov, and in the search bar put Citizen Advisory Committee on Governance, you'll go to the page. Patrick, do we have all of the data? The backup data is on that site right now?
I believe so, but if it's not, we'll make sure
Okay.
it's up there.
Because I think that's really important as this group discussion evolved, and some people would frequently say, well, what's the need for that? An example would be the issue of districts, and Amy, you can maybe speak to this better, but the average district size of 112,000 constituents is, I mean, I think you were finding a lot of our peer cities, their average size was like 50,000 constituents. And so that our district size was way out of line with our peer cities. In other cities as well, I think Nashville's was, I don't know, like 40,000 or something. But they have 42 council members.
How many members?
We don't want that.
How many? Say it again. How many members do they have on their board?
Like 42 council members, and they don't even know each other.
The manager just said, oh, God, I'm
He would
leaving
love
right
that.
now.
Yeah. So, but I think the point is that if you look at the data, it really speaks to why there's a need to look at, as Mr. Graham said, some potentially massive restructuring, because it is different than at the time when Mayor Gant and Mayor Vinroot looked at this council. I think we've grown 20% as a city by then to the 15th largest city. And when we're looking at economic development, when we're looking at things like the comprehensive vision plan, we're doing this on a scale of major cities across the country. We're competing for businesses, recruitment, on this with cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York. And so we've got to really be able to be prepared as council members to be able to operate in a fashion to be able to really absorb that kind of information and do long-term planning. And I say that as we look at the Silver Line planning, transit planning for the next couple decades, or even rezonings, when you jump into this job and are supposed to spend a 7-hour night making rezoning decisions, that speaks to maybe the need for more bandwidth for council members. So I encourage everybody to look at the website.
All right, Mr. Eggleston?
One additional question that came to mind as I was looking through it, and this might be for Mr. Baker as opposed to Ms. Peacock, but the recommendation was for the potential voter referendum to be held in 2021. So if there were a referendum for 4-year terms in 2021, would that either, is there any sort of prescription to whether that would be held in the primary or the general? And if approved, would some pre-prescribed set of people, either the at-large or the district representatives, be getting elected in the general election to a 4-year term, subject to the approval of that referendum?
Yeah, that is set up in the referendum in terms of how you're going to break that up, and that is something that we would discuss as we got along.
So you would know whether it would be, and I would think we would want to align with the school board the way that theirs are staggered, which I guess would mean that that would be the district reps in 2021 for the school board. So voters would know that if this passes, then whoever you are electing for the district positions would then be serving a 4-year term, and the at-large positions would be serving a 2-year term.
That, if that's the way you went, yes, that's how it would work out. But yes, the voters would know exactly how it's going to break down as they're voting. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Ajmira.
All right, Ms. Johnson? And we
Thank
get Ms.
you.
Johnson up?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, we just can't, there you are. We see you and hear you now.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to thank the committee for the work that they did. I wanted to know if you could go back to the slide where you were, we were talking about the partisanship or the bipartisanship or nonpartisanship.
Right, let's see what slide that is.
They wanted the nonpartisanship slide, Donata.
Wendy, can you go back
We
to
can-
I
the
think that's
nonpartisanship
the
slide?
voting
Pull it up.
slide.
Can you ask we've all got our books,
Yeah,
Ms.
my
Johnson.
question is, what was the data that supported that or the justification regarding the nonpartisanship? I also thought I heard someone, or heard you say, looking at redrawing the line so that it's equal among partisanship. It's my understanding that Mecklenburg County is only about 18 to 20% Republican. So I kind of just wanted to know the justification of looking at that or recommending that.
Was that your discussion?
The nonpartisan versus partisan,
I think that's two separate conversations, right?
right, that was your first question, correct?
Yes, just some more information about that.
Right. We looked at some data from the, well, it's in the, we've got a discussion and decision outline that we worked with, and we looked at data from government channels and research that's been done, and we talked about that and came to a vote on, it was pretty close, 6-5, moving from partisan to nonpartisan. A large percent of, let's see, so this is on page 8 of the report, but 93% of NC jurisdictions are nonpartisan. And according to the League of Cities, more than 75% of all municipalities nationwide hold nonpartisan elections, including 22 of the country's 30 largest cities. And 18 out of 20 peer cities hold nonpartisan elections. So I think that kind of conversation made people think a little bit more about considering moving to nonpartisan based on that data.
Okay. And did I also hear you say that, that it might be recommended that we look at redrawing the line so that the districts are even among parties?
Right. Well, I think what we're looking for or recommending to the council is when they make the decision to do any changes to the district, that the districts are balanced as possible. And it'd be nice if they could be balanced along, partisan lines, but I don't know if that's always going to happen. But these are goals that we gave and it's in the report, and I mentioned it tonight, about what we'd hope you guys would look at when you're going to redistrict. But we're not actually redrawing the districts, we're just hoping that they'll get a little smaller.
Okay.
And then-
Mr. Baker wants to address your question, Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, if I could just add on that point, we talked about it being relative, so it wasn't like if there were 8 districts, we were looking for 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans or what have you.
Right.
It was relative to the population.
Ms. Johnson, did you hear that? That was not the intent.
Okay. And then, on that website or in the report, are the sizes of the districts included, like the number of residents in each district? I know you said that the average is about 112, but I know here in District 4, I believe we have about 130, and mine is not even one of the largest. So is that data captured on the website or in the report, the number
Is
of
it in the
residents?
Not yet, because we don't have the, we don't have that yet because we haven't gotten the results from the census, but we do anticipate
I think she meant the current district population.
current one.
We did look at it, I'm not sure what page it's on right now, but
Did I say that correctly? You were asking the existing
Yes,
district's
yes.
population, not what the census.
Where
would
that
be.
average, yeah, I'd like to see the sizes of the.
I think we can get that. If it's not in the appendix, we can always add it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, we definitely have it, I'm just not sure right this minute where it
If you
is, but
can
it's
put
in
your
the
finger on
appendix.
it. Okay, Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Also, I'd like to thank the committee members, appreciate the work that you all have done to gather this. My question is to follow up on Mr. Drake's question earlier. So when it comes to council makeup and partisan or non-partisan election, is that something that, let's say if there is a petition where there is 5,000 signatures, would we have to put that in the referendum?
So a nonpartisan elections required of a referendum, Mr. Baker?
Yeah, you can do that on your own, or you could send it out to referendum. I have not looked to see if that's also subject to the 5,000 to force a referendum, but I can find that information for you.
We'll get that information, Ms. Ajmira.
Yes, I'm interested in understanding whether 5,000 signatures would trigger putting that also in the referendum, along with the 2-year, 4-year term question.
Okay.
So the committee that was, Amy, you had mentioned earlier that partisan, non-partisan election, it was a 6-5 vote, is that correct?
Yes. I think it was not accurate in the chart, but yeah, it was 6-5. So
Okay,
6-4, 6-4 moving to nonpartisan, 5-4 staying at partisan.
Okay, so I guess this slide needs to be updated because.
Yes, yeah. That was a little typo we
Okay,
missed, sorry.
So what was the committee makeup? How many members were there, and how many Democrats, how many Republicans, and how many unaffiliated?
We had 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 3 unaffiliated,
So it was
of all ages and backgrounds in all districts.
I think the committee members were recommended by the city council members.
So I guess, so there were total 9 committee members, Amy, and 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 3 unaffiliated, is that correct?
Yes. We're getting to 9. Who am I missing?
I mean, you don't have to provide that information now, you can just, we can get the information later along with other information.
Okay.
All right, that's all I have, thank you.
I think that's everything. I do want to say thank you publicly to the Mayor Pro Tem. When we started, after our retreat, and we started talking about what we were going to do with these 2 committees, Charlotte Move started a little bit sooner than governance. Governance started, and both of these groups have stood up for completing their charge, and I want to say particularly the support of the Mayor Pro Tem and the Governance Committee made a big difference because we were so busy with everything COVID at the time. It's hard to look back and think about March, but that's, I want to say thank you personally and professionally, Julie, for that work. And Amy, we can't say enough for your
Great
committee and the work that you've done. We're not going to let you go. Mr. Graham asked what's next. I would like to have a public hearing on this report December the 14th at our council meeting so that we can get it posted on the website, but also would like for everyone to get an opportunity to think about how do we get this out. And Amy, if your group would be willing to, for example, there's this NPR radio show that Mike Collins has sometimes to talk about, well, why did you do something in the city's purview? This might be one of those that we could do, but anywhere before citizens and faith-based groups or some of our major advocacy groups, if your committee would still work with us, because you've done the work and you can explain it best, and that would help us to build out the ability for people to comment on it in December. So if you would be willing, we certainly appreciate it. To all of the members of the committee watching and those that are not, we really are grateful. Thank you very much for what you've done.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Newton,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Newton put his hand up. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Newton, it's really hard because Ms. Jackson just told me, and so now we're going to Mr. Newton.
I got it up late, and I don't mean to steal any of your thunder, Madam Mayor. Sorry about that. I did have a couple of just late-round questions here. The first one that just occurred to me as the conversation was unfolding, if we're talking about nonpartisan elections, how is that going to operate or work? And this might be best suited for the city attorney, I suppose. Are we saying that the primaries would be eliminated and that there would only be general elections at that point?
I think Mr. Eggleston asked that question, and
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Sorry for the repeat.
So, but no, Mr. Baker answered it, so I think he can summarize it again, right?
Yeah,
Oh, is it
it's slightly different as I heard it, because there are a couple of options. I think what the committee came back with was to move to a nonpartisan election, but there are a couple of nonpartisan elections. There's a nonpartisan primary, and then there's a nonpartisan election and runoff. Those are, I think, the two nonpartisans. So there are a couple of choices that you'll have to make. But what the committee dealt with was whether to continue with the partisan elections, and I think there's only one brand of partisan election, versus moving to nonpartisan, and that's what their vote was at 6-5.
That's a recommendation.
Recommendation, yes.
Right,
Sorry.
recommendation.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in knowing a little bit more about those different options. And then I want to ask too, so I know how involved, and frankly, it's their job, the Board of Elections, to how involved they are in their job to conduct elections. Have they been consulted with at all, or have we reached out to them to get input on this particular item pertaining to nonpartisan elections?
We did not specifically reach out to the Mecklenburg Board of Elections, but we did get data from them. I'm not sure which department in the city worked on that, but so we did have data, historical data from them.
Okay. I'd be interested to know what their opinions are as well. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for committee. Thank you to the committee for all their hard work on this. And thank you, Madam Mayor, for giving me the opportunity on the tail end of this to ask some questions, even if they've already been asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I have Mr. Winston.
Thank you. Sorry for being late. I just wanted to speak to the constituents that might be watching. My first business meeting when I was elected in my first term 3 years ago, this was the most glaring, one of the most glaring things that I saw that needed to be worked on was the work that gets done in City Hall needed to be updated. We operate in ways that really inhibit us from being as effective as we can, whether it be the length of terms and how our governance structure is set up and how we govern. So while I would definitely not have liked it to take 3+ years to address, I'm grateful that we are here right now And I hope the constituents really kind of dig into this and dive into this. This is not just politicians wanting more power. This is really about the processes and the methods that are available to do the work. And right now, working off of basically an effective year-long cycle of doing that work is not effective. So like I said before, Mayberry might have been set in North Carolina, but we ain't Mayberry. So we need to update this, and I hope the citizens will dive in all across the city and weigh in on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Watlington?
Just as we wrap this up, I just want to reiterate, we've got to make sure that we are clear about what problems we're trying to solve. I don't necessarily disagree with much of what's in the recommendations, but I think when it comes to our constituents and the community, and we're talking about effectiveness and efficiency of government, ultimately, that's measured by how we're delivering to the community. And so for me, if we're going out into the community and spreading this message, I don't feel comfortable that I can tell somebody in the constituency what this does to benefit them. So if this may be a question for Marie to come back with, but help me understand, outside of just matching and mapping with peer cities, help me connect the dots to how this delivers better government versus just looking like somebody else. I hope that we can get some more information in regards to that. So as we're thinking and contemplating these things, we actually know what it's supposed to deliver. Thanks.
We created a report to synthesize the data that we worked on and worked through. And we also have a discussion and decision outline that we use where we put up the charge questions. We debated about what was important to the committee. And then in our report, we also show the reasoning, a little more about the reasoning why we made these decisions. So it's only, I think, 19 pages. It's a pretty easy read, but that may be helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What I'm asking for really is more outside of the in-process stuff, but the output metrics. So that might be measured by satisfaction, for instance, in the constituency in other cities. And we can figure out, I'm sure our data folks can figure out how that looks, but as we're building a message or even thinking about what we're going to get out of this at the output metric, I think there's some work to be done there for me. But I appreciate what you said about having the data about what you all thought was important. I'm looking for something a little more externally focused.
Yeah, I think as a whole on the committee, I think the committee members felt like they wanted more interaction with their council members. And what we're hearing from council is that they need more time. And so we're trying to figure out how to make it more efficient for both parties so that it's a win-win. So the community feels like they're getting supported and the council people feel like they're getting what they need to serve. So
connect the dots a little bit more hard lines, but thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we're going to finally say thank you and go home and have a recovery drink or something of some
Thank you so
sort.
much,
Okay.
y'all. It's been a pleasure.
Nice
Take
tall
care.
glass of water.
Motion to remove 3 council seats?
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you very much. All right, our next item on the agenda is the Legacy Commission. This commission was formed as a result of requests by council members that we look at some of the issues that are national, following in the footsteps of our library board, our school system, to look at where we have history in our city that does not reflect the lens of equity and inclusion. And so I'm going to ask Tiffany Blackwell to introduce the Legacy Commission. She's been the staff working on this commission, and we're going to hear from the chair.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Again, my name is Tiffany Blackwell. I'm in the Office of Strategy and Budget, and I'm the staff resource for the Legacy Commission. Tonight, you're going to hear from Emily Zimmerman, who's the chair of the commission, and she's going to provide an update of the work that we've done so far. And then after her presentation, we'll be happy to entertain your questions. So Emily, I think we're ready for you.
Terrific. Thank you, Tiffany. Good evening, Mayor Lyles, Mayor Pro Tem Issa, and council members. It's my great pleasure to give you an interim report on the work of the Legacy Commission. As you see on this slide, we were given a threefold charge to undertake a comprehensive study of street names and monuments that honor a legacy of Confederate soldiers, slave owners, and segregationists, and that all of our decisions were to be informed by a community engagement process, and all the final recommendations would help the city begin to write a new, more inclusive history. Next slide. Here are the names of the Legacy Commission members. There were 5 appointed by the mayor and 10 by council members. And I want to give a major shout out to all the Legacy Commission members and the 2 consulting historians, Dr. Willie Griffin of Levine Museum of the New South and Dr. Karen Cox of UNC Charlotte. All have been incredibly focused and committed, contributing significant time and very thoughtful discussion on these issues. And despite having to have all 7 of our meetings virtually, since we were organized in July, at the end of July, the commission has really moved through deliberations very effectively, thanks in large measure to the terrific logistical and administrative support given by Tiffany. So I want to also thank you, Tiffany, publicly. Next slide, please. So now I just want to give you, council members and mayor, a brief overview of the Legacy Commission review process that we have undertaken. Historical context was deemed to be essential to the work of the commission. Presentations by the consulting historians provided critical and foundational information about the historical background that gave rise to the current landscape of monuments and street names that we have here in Charlotte. Dr. Cox, in her presentation, Understanding the Lost Cause and Charlotte's Role in Perpetuating Its Myths, provided valuable national context. We learned that most Confederate monuments were not erected immediately after the Civil War to memorialize the war dead, but in later years, long after the war had ended. The Lost Cause mythology portrayed slavery as a benevolent institution and denied that the Civil War was fought to protect the institution of slavery. The Lost Cause celebrated the Confederacy as a just and noble cause, not a treasonous war against the United States. The widespread placement of Confederate monuments across the South was part of a concerted campaign to intimidate African Americans politically and to institute laws excluding them from the mainstream of public life. It was noted that nearly all of the monuments honoring the Confederacy and its leaders were erected without any kind of democratic process. At no point were African Americans involved in decision-making about monuments or the naming of schools or streets. Dr. Cox gave specific examples of Charlotte's participation in Lost Cause activities. Dr. Griffin, in his presentation, Slavery, the Civil War, and the Rise of White Supremacy in Charlotte, provided valuable local context. In 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, the enslaved population made up 40% of Mecklenburg's population, or roughly 6,800 residents. Charlotte's New South image obscures its connection to the large slave plantation economy of the Old South. In the Charlotte region, enslaved labor grew wheat, corn, and cotton. And Dr. Griffin also noted a little-known chapter of Charlotte's history. And I was at Levine Museum of the New South for 20 years, and I had never heard this before. And in fact, I believe he discovered it for the first time. In the 1820s and the 1830s, there were an estimated 5,000 enslaved people forced to labor in the massive gold mining operations of Mecklenburg County. In terms of the Civil War, Charlotte was not the site of any major Civil War battles, but it did make significant contributions to the Confederate cause. It supported the war effort by hosting the North Carolina Military Institute, which trained Confederate soldiers, a branch of the Confederate Mint, which printed money, and the relocated Confederate Navy Yard, which produced armaments. From the late 1880s to the turn of the 20th century, Charlotte's policymakers and media fuel the rise of white supremacy across the state. Throughout this period, the Charlotte Observer regularly produced articles and political cartoons that stoked racial division. African Americans were often portrayed as violent criminals who were unworthy of the rights of citizenship. The paper also featured the activities of a number of white supremacy clubs, another piece of Charlotte's history that I had never heard about. And these white supremacy clubs ran notices in the newspaper, and the white supremacy clubs were made up of Charlotte's leading political, civic, and business figures. Dr. Cox also reviewed the approaches taken by 4 other cities to evaluate their Confederate monuments and street names. She described recent initiatives in Atlanta, Dallas, Louisville, and Richmond. And Dr. Griffin provided a description of Confederate monuments and markers in Elmwood Cemetery, as well as a list of current city street names associated with slave owners, Confederate leaders, and white supremacists. Next slide, please. In reviewing monuments, it was determined that there are no Confederate monuments currently in public spaces controlled by the city of Charlotte beyond those that are located in Elmwood Cemetery. We also learned that commissions in other cities and scholars who have written about the topic have largely agreed that cemeteries, along with battlefields, are appropriate locations for Confederate monuments. Next slide. In reviewing current street names, the Commission believes that the continued commemoration of slave owners, Confederate leaders, and white supremacists does not reflect the values that Charlotte upholds today and is a direct affront to descendants of the enslaved and oppressed African Americans who labored to build this city. The Commission established its highest priorities for change for certain streets and very much looks forward to receiving public input and feedback. The Commission agrees that community engagement is critical and necessary before any street name changes. In looking to the future, the Commission discussed ways that the city can reimagine its commemorative landscape to align with the values and diversity of today's Charlotte. One way that we have discussed in depth is how we change criteria, establishing new criteria for naming streets in the future. Next slide, please. Because street name changes have figured so prominently in our discussions, we received a briefing from CDOT about current city policy for street name changes. And you see on the screen what is currently called for. That citizens may request name changes and that a petition of 75% of the property owners on the street will be required for non-agency departmental request. And then here, you know, the property owners are responsible for the cost associated with the street name changes. Next slide. Next steps, as I said, this is an interim report. The Commission's proposals are now being prepared for public comment. The city's Community Relations Committee and Communications Department are developing a survey and plans for virtual feedback sessions. The Commission will reconvene on December 2nd to review the results of the community engagement process. And the Commission looks forward to making its recommendations to Council fully informed by resident feedback at your meeting on December the 14th. On behalf of commission members, I want to extend our thanks to you for allowing us the opportunity to engage in this important work to reimagine Charlotte's symbolic landscape and to help you achieve the city's vision to be an inclusive city where all residents are valued and respected. So thank you. That's the update, and I welcome any questions.
All right, we're going to start with questions, but Emily, please let us again thank you and every member of the commission, Donnie Simmons, Frank Coley, Levester Flowers, Deborah Smith, Michael Sullivan, Fannie Falono, Alan Cornavet, Lynn Norman, Mary Newsom, Tom Hanchett, Mildred McCullough, Kristen Weil, and B. Thompson. I can't say Beatrice. B. Thompson, so thank you. If you're watching, if any of you are watching this tonight, know that you have our continued gratefulness for the work that you're doing and that you'll continue to do over the next several weeks. And thank you for having the deadline of December, because I think once again we'll have some council deliberation before we move forward on any recommendations. So let's talk a little bit about the interim report and recommendations that will be coming in December 14th. I have Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Zimmern. Just maybe two questions asking you to foretell a little bit what we'll hear in December, but based on your presentation tonight, are the only things that the commission has identified that they think the city needs to consider changing street names as of now?
Yes. The street names are the only things that we have determined that we would be recommending for change. We do have some additional recommendations about providing context to certain items. And, you know, we have some general recommendations about what we would envision in the future.
Which kind of leads to the second part of that question, which is, you sort of answered it there. I appreciate the portion about cemeteries being an appropriate place for some of this history, but might that be part of your recommendations as well, that there be contextualizing of things even in Elmwood to better help folks understand the history?
That contextualization is certainly a strategy that we're going to be recommending. As I said, we really want to secure community feedback that will inform our recommendations, but contextualization of the monuments that do exist, we think is important.
I agree. I guess the only other question would be, do you anticipate making recommendations solely about, and the two obviously that come to mind, like a stone wall and a hill, street name wise, and I'm sure there are others out there that maybe people aren't as familiar with, do you anticipate just identifying the ones that need to be changed, or have y'all discussed maybe bringing forward recommendations of folks you think might be worthy of that recognition that we might change it to?
The commission has had some discussion about the kinds of, we've had an extensive conversation about criteria of what criteria should be used to select individuals in the future. And we have brainstormed some names, but we really feel strongly that we want to hear from the community and that the community should be very much involved, unlike in the past, in suggesting names that then can be weighed against a set of new criteria.
Yeah, I think it'd be very valuable to have a community poll of sorts that folks could nominate people they believe might be worthy of that nomination. I would caution us that we shouldn't make that binding, or I could see John Oliver or somebody turning that into a prank where we have to rename a street after him, but as he recently did with a wastewater plant. But I do think the community would have some great ideas of people who are more deserving of that recognition as we change those names. So we'll look forward to December.
One recommendation that I believe will make the cut is that we learned just coincidentally about 2 weeks ago that the Mellon Foundation, which is the largest foundation in the country supporting the humanities, has announced a new monuments project, and over the next 5 years is going to fund $250 million for communities to reimagine their commemorative landscape and to will support contextualization, will support moving monuments, renaming monuments, et cetera, et cetera. So oftentimes, you know, there are recommendations and no funding sources, but I think that whatever the council decides in this area, that, you know, going for one of the grants from that monuments project would be something that we would heartily recommend.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I just want to thank the chairperson and the committee members for the excellent work that they have done in terms of really taking their time. Madam Mayor, thank you, so that we could really make an informed decision versus a hasty one. That being said, I do look forward to the December 14th report, the community input, and really the how we will begin to really make the type of change necessary to really reflect where we are in our community as relates to these type of issues. So thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions? Anyone online?
Mr. Newton and Ms. Ajmera.
Mr. Newton?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman, for the presentation, and thank you to the commission for the great work here. What stood out to me during the presentation was the portion pertaining to property owners and property owners being required to shoulder the costs associated with the street change or street name change. I was wondering, what are those costs? And I'd be concerned whether cost would be prohibitive if property owners, if you were to achieve that 75% of signatures, could there be this situation where those costs could be prohibitive for the change? So what exactly are those costs? And was there any thought given to maybe exceptions to that rule requiring property owners to shoulder those costs?
Well, that's not really a commission decision. That would be a city council decision.
Hey, Emily, this is
The
Tiffany.
kinds of costs, we have a CDOT. Tiffany, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a great question. That current policy is based if a property holder on the street makes a petition currently. So that's the current process. Obviously, throughout this Legacy Commission work, there are, the council has an opportunity to change that process based off of the recommendations from the Legacy Commission. So they're not exactly the same, if that helps, Councilmember Newton.
I hear this.
But the kinds of costs, I mean, the cost, you know, the cost are things, if you change the street, everybody has to change their address. I mean, on all their materials, advertising, commercial, you know, for business is significant. And in residential areas, actually the CDOT staff member who presented said, it's hard, it can be very hard for residents, you know, to go through the mechanics of changing. So those are considerations for council, I believe, to think about and how to ameliorate any hardship.
Yeah, and we're not talking about, so it sounds like we're not talking about, like, say, taking down the sign and putting up a new sign or anything like that. That would be something that would be covered by the city. And I completely get those other collateral concurrent costs that you're mentioning, Ms. Zimmerman, but some of those more simplistic costs. And I kind of when I first heard this, like I was drawing similarities between the Vision Zero program or the offshoot of Vision Zero, where we're putting in speed humps in communities that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford them. And I'm wondering, what costs? So are there costs that are more within our scope that would be covered? Is that what I'm hearing here? And I know someone weighed in.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. Thank you.
All right. I was over in Druid Hills the other day, and there's a Jefferson Davis Street that the sign has already been changed. It's now J. Davis Street. So
Yes.
people can take it on their own and make some adjustments sometime.
We do have that cost as well when residents change the
I
names.
think somebody should go take a picture of the sign and see how it lost some of its letters. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to thank the committee and Emily for your hard work. I learned a lot today. It was really the history lesson for me. So I certainly appreciate the committee's work, and I do look forward to hearing community feedback on December the 14th. So appreciative of your work.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments?
Ms. Johnson.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson?
Can you hear me?
Barely.
Okay, can you, I'll
Get
speak
that
up.
mic closer, yeah.
Okay. I wanted to thank the committee also and thank them for the work that they're doing. Give a shout out to Mr. Flowers in District 4. I have a question though. On the process of changing the street names, if that's the current, I have two questions. The first one, changing the street names, if that's the current process, that 75% of the residents can request it and that they are willing to cover the cost. Is that correct?
May I want to make sure I understood your question correctly. So currently, if there is a petition to change a street name, yes, if 75% of the property owners agree to that petition, then yes, we do not charge the property owners to change the name of the actual street sign. The street signs are $250, but there are other costs potentially associated for that business or that property owner to absorb.
So one of the we're trying to do in right now is look at equity and remove Confederate soldiers' names and really try to be culturally and racially sensitive. If there were a group that said, well, I want to change our street name to some Confederate soldier, and now that they know the process, is there a screening? Is that a council decision? I mean, is this something that we as council need to consider? Does the city need to approve the street name before that's done?
Yes, there's a current process in place in partnership with Mecklenburg County about how street names are approved. Obviously, there's a review process within both the city and the county in conjunction to make sure that there's no repetitive street names. I don't know what the current criteria is. That's something that we can get you after this meeting.
I think there
Right.
are some.
Okay. And then secondly, I know we're looking at street names and possibly monuments in the future. What about other public art or something else that could be culturally insensitive or racist? Does the public have a way to report that to this commission or another commission?
That falls outside of my purview. I will try to look into that and see. I don't know of a current process for that.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. For one, if we decide to change any street names pursuant to these recommendations, we would have to introduce a policy that was a council action. It shouldn't be up to the people who live on a street to decide if it's still called that or not, because this is a general public interest issue that I think is a policy question that goes beyond the people who live on the street. I will also say that as much as I agree with the idea of not celebrating people who are a party to a lot of the past, of the unpleasantness of the past, This is the history of North Carolina, and I'm just afraid that we are trying to kind of rewrite that history in order to absolve ourselves or to disown or disavow. This was not something that a small group of people did. If you take this out of the history books, there isn't much else in there, because that's what was going on in North Carolina. So I agree that we shouldn't have monuments that appear to celebrate some of these people. I just worry that there's an attitude here that we can somehow distance ourselves from our own history. And I don't know that that is necessarily the most respectful thing to do either, rather than own it. Thank you.
So, Mr. Driggs, I'm going to just have to say a couple of things, because this is really close to me. When my mother was growing up in Columbia, South Carolina, every cross street was named after all the Confederate generals, and they had to memorize that in 8th grade. They had to memorize that because that was something that they wanted embedded in their memory, or in the children of color's memory, because that was so much a part of what they said was a war that was a succession war, not about color. They always claimed it was just about states' rights. But I have to say to you that when we have these kinds of initiatives that are so much a part of what was neglected, in my history book in South Carolina growing up, there was never a mention of slavery in the war. And the book, and a good friend of mine, Alex Oliphant, whose great-grandmother wrote the book, he has a copy of it, and in that book, the South won the war. And that's just how deep this goes. It wasn't just a part of the idea of recreating history, because if you take out this, what you've got is a blank slate that no one else contributed to. So I just have to say, sometimes we really have to question ourselves and the motivations. If you've seen some of the pictures of the editorials in the Charlotte Observer where they created black men that look like animals when they were walking past white women, it's just not a history that we can say, well, it was a part of history. It was a part of a concerted effort to demean people of color. And it doesn't matter what shade of color you were. It was just a very difficult thing to do. So I understand, I hear that a lot, and I understand that it's a part of history, but it's a history that left out any mention of people that really made a difference here. So I hope that we'll keep this in mind as we move forward. And
Mayor, may I comment on that for a moment?
Please, Ms. Zimmern.
I have a comment.
The commission has talked a great deal about history, and I think one point is certainly to echo what the mayor has said, that the history that is portrayed is only one view of history and one part of history. It is not the full history. I mean, there's not a history of women's contributions. There's not a history of African-American contributions. There's not a history of Native American contributions. It's one particular view. And the interesting thing is that it was a very concerted effort. It wasn't accidental. It was done very intentionally. So one question, it's not about erasure of history, but another point that even beyond your view or anyone's view of history and what is appropriate to be included or excluded, is that we have been guided by what is commemoration, and commemoration is different from history. And I will quote a historian's view. History is about what happened in the past, while commemoration is about the present. We put up statues and celebrate holidays to honor figures from the past who embody some quality we admire. As society changes, the qualities we care about shift. And so what we hold up and honor just as the school CMS changing the names of schools, it's what is it that we're holding up and honoring? And I think that's where we want to get community input about what is it that we honor today that we want to celebrate. And I think that those views do change over time.
It's a tough subject. So Mayor Pro Tem?
And Mr. Winston is also, Mr. Winston.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So what I was going to say was actually touched on by Emily a little bit, that I think, so I moved here 22 years ago, almost 23 years ago, and Charlotte to me just didn't have an identity, to be honest, and I think we hear this a lot. And so when I think about this city that is always trying to brand itself or come up with something new every few years as to who we are, what we are, I think what's missing is honoring those who were such a part of the history of our city. The commemoration of Civil War Confederates, from what I've seen, most of them really didn't have anything to do with Charlotte. They were just being elevated as heroes in the Confederacy, and that's just not our city. Maybe they had something to do with here, tangentially, but if we really talk about who are the forefathers of this city who had so much to do with the history of this city, and you look at a Julius Chambers or a James Ferguson, it includes white people too, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is our legacy. But really just giving that honor to Confederate soldiers who weren't really a part of Charlotte has always kind of bothered me. It's not the identity of Charlotte. It doesn't speak to the history of Charlotte. So I love the work you're doing. I love hearing more about the history of Charlotte that I hadn't heard about in my 22 years here. I think every citizen has a responsibility to know about the history of their community and their city and what role it played in the bigger picture of the time, the good, the bad, the warts, the whole bit. But I'm really grateful for the work the committee's done, and I look forward to seeing what the recommendations are. So thank you.
All right. Mr. Winston?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Mr. Driggs said. This is not particular to Mr. Driggs necessarily. The narrative, the idea that fully contextualizing history today is somehow distancing ourselves or hiding what actually happened is just incorrect. What we have today is a telling of history, as Ms. Zimmerman said, that is one-sided, and it is really a stealing of valor in certain situations. And it is the responsibility of us as leaders, not just on city council, but leaders of cities of communities, of states and of nations, to accurately contextualize where we come from. For instance, a lot of people look at the 20-yard line at Bank of America Stadium as the red zone. I think of it as the place where racial terror lynching occurred in Good Samaritan Hospital, which was the former all-black hospital here in Charlotte. But you would never know that because it is not. That is something that we hide and we don't fully contextualize it. So the more light that we are able to shine on where we've come from, we will be more able to get to the full reality of the beloved communities that we all deserve. Thank you.
All right. I think that that's our last question. We look forward to the December report. Again, and when we get this report with the resident feedback, we'll have to schedule a time for it to be on the agenda after we get some more explanation from it. So hopefully this will be an early January item. So with that, I'm actually going to turn over. These are the two committees that we have reported. I think are we going to hear anything about Charlotte Moves tonight, Mr. Jones? A little bit. A little bit. So I think that's going along. Those are the three committees that the council really.
Mayor, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. My hand is up. It's been up.
Ms. Johnson, yes?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I also wanted to comment on what Mr. Driggs said. he said that it's an attempt to kind of denounce history, and for me, yes, it is. And I think we need to be clear that Black Lives Matter is more than a mural on Tryon Street, that this is a movement with any other race. If there was something so traumatic and blatant, that there was reminders of it, such as if it was the Holocaust or for any other race, that, and I shouldn't say just any other race, but we would not, it wouldn't be an argument. We wouldn't say, well, that's history. But when it's the Black race and it's slavery, and, you know, we're just told to kind of just get over it, and it's part of history. So I look forward to this committee reviewing these street names, and hopefully we can get as many of these street names changed, because it's time that we really start accepting trauma that's been placed on Blacks for so long and the inequities. So anything we can do as this council to denounce the Confederate soldiers, and I look forward to supporting it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr.
Thank you,
Drake.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much, Emily. We really appreciate you and what you bring to the table. Hope all the family's doing well.
Thank you, thank you. Be well. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Now I'm going to turn it over to the manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and members of council. Normally what I do is I provide you with a 30-day memo, and I wanted to make sure that I accounted for a change that we were going to do tonight that we've moved to next week, and we moved one item up. So with the last 30-day memo, we were going to do I-85 and Sugar Creek update, but we believe that that is more connected with next week's agenda, where we'll discuss cure of violence and some other things that are happening in the corridors of opportunity. So we moved up the transportation update. So Taiwo, who's had a very busy week or two, we're bringing him back out, but he's been doing such a great job. We're hoping that he can tackle some tough subjects tonight in the same way that he's done that in the past. I do want to just say a couple of things, Mayor and Council, as it relates to the task force, the commissions, and the committees. And it'll shock her a little bit, but I just want to give my thanks to Donata Jackson for all that she's been doing with all of these. And Jason Snyder and his team, I think it's about 6 different people that are handling all these task force commissions and committees. And Mayor, in our conversation today, I kind of figured out that maybe with all the stuff that we're doing and racing so fast, sometimes we don't take the time to thank people. So I wanted to make sure that we did that. The other thing, Ty, I just want to talk a little bit about where Ty is going with some of the CATS initiatives. I just want to highlight 2. And again, Ty, thanks for last week, everything you did with the comp plan and Charlotte Moves. And I think you're one of the few people that I know can have a party, have an event on Halloween to talk about where we're going to be 20 years from now.
And it was great. I have to say, the whole team, the activities on the screen where the people in the cars got to play games, I kind of expected, and it was just exceptional. So thank you to your entire team. Everything was exceptional. The music especially.
And so 2 things that, keeping with the theme of the annual strategy meeting this past January and being able to handle big items, as Ty starts off tonight, many of these are big items and maybe nothing bigger than the first 2. And that's a bit to do with CATS and the electric buses. And also I want to make sure I give a shout out to the airport, because they really started down this pathway with the electric buses. A year ago, we applied for a grant and we just didn't get it. But then we tried again with much more success. And I do want to make sure that I mention Sarah Hazel, who's been leading our sustainability efforts. It's unbelievable what she's been able to do over the course of the last year to 18 months. And also Catherine Coomer, who's with the Climate Challenge Advisor in this area. I do want to say that all the great work that this council has done I believe you put $4 million towards these sustainable efforts during this current budget cycle. And because of that and other things that you've done, going all the way back to the CAP, the Bloomberg has continued for additional 6 months our climate challenge. So that's great news for the city. We have some moonshots that we're still trying to work on. And one of them is dealing with the electric buses for cats. I will tell you, I think the mayor and the mayor pro tem have probably pushed me more than anybody else in this area. And I will tell you that, a year ago we struggled with it. And one of the things that we've always talked about is that the technology changing and having public-private partnerships. And we have a great one that's in the works right now. And the key is that it's in the works. We have not finished the contract, but we put an RFP out, and Duke has won. And this would give us an opportunity with Duke being able to make the initial investment with electric buses for cats, as well as the infrastructure. We would come up with what are those goals and objectives that we would have to meet. And we would then be able to, if those goals and objectives have been met, to be able to have electrified the fleet. And I just think that that's just a lot of credit to Sarah and the whole team to keep pushing. And again, our goal, we believe we're unique in the country with this. And until some other city comes and proves us otherwise, we believe that we're taking the leadership with a great partner. And so work is still left to be done there. But I wanted to make sure that you understood that we are very enthusiastic about this opportunity. So with that said, Ty, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Manager Jones. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. All of these things are actually connected when you think about it, because the CATS battery electric buses, about 6 of them that we're going to roll out, really will help to meet our goal that we actually adopted as part of a strategic energy action plan. But not only that, as we've been talking about Charlotte Moves, we said one of those buckets is to manage roadway congestion, and that part of that is also installing electric vehicle charging stations along major corridors, and talking about autonomous vehicles. And so innovation and technology in transportation is so important, but at the end of the day, it's really also about making sure that we have clean air. Obviously, you have all of that in the Strategic Energy Action Plan that was adopted a while back. The managers already covered a lot of grounds in this first topic of my update tonight. The key thing is that we're going to be back to you in December with an RCA to formally accept the grant from the Federal Transit Administration for about $3.7 million, which obviously CATS is also matching. So I think that's a major, major deal. And there are a few other things in this presentation that are tough. So I thought starting with good news is a good way to begin. I won't go over this again because the manager's gone over that, but we're still working through some contract negotiations right now with Duke, and then we will be informing you over time as we go forward. So there are about 5 items I want to update you on tonight. Each one of them can actually stand on their own and be separate presentations. And each one of them also has the respective project managers who are here to answer specific questions that you may have. So the first one is on the battery electric buses. The second one is on the Tryon Street Pilot Plaza. And I don't know if you have the report in front of you, but if you recall, this has been about 5 months now since the short segment. Yes, okay, so you have the reports in front of you. Since the short segment of Tryon Street was closed to vehicular traffic as a result of the Black Lives Matter mural installation, that time period has allowed us to really see what happens when you create a space for people to safely gather in public spaces. It's also provided us an opportunity to engage our local artists in the process of placemaking and city building. And when we temporarily closed the street, just wanted to share some of the key dates there, but I'll come back to the November 9 date. But when we regionally closed the streets, we wanted to achieve certain key goals for us, because if we're going to, we've seen other cities, not just because of the coronavirus, but even as part of city making, that creating plazas and activating them are places to get people out, they foster interactions, they actually help people to be able to connect, and businesses do thrive in this environment. So we had a short time to be able to test certain things, but the overall goal was we wanted to create a safe environment, positive and welcoming experience, but address quite a number of things in that process. We had a survey that took place between August 8 and 30, and the survey was taken by about 2,500 participants, granted all throughout the city, but mostly in the center city area. Almost 7,000 comments were received. But one of the things that we observed during an extended period, which I thought was quite interesting, is that we found that the plaza had 48 pedestrians every 5 minutes. I thought that that was quite interesting, and that's, even before the pandemic, that's not something we could really say that we saw. And so that really tells us that testing that really gives us an opportunity that in the future, how can we really do more but do better of this type of thing? So it tells us that the mural installation was a success, but it also tells us, perhaps even importantly, that there's a desire to put people over the automobile in public places. And that's really something that we want to try as we go into our future. So, say, over the next couple of days, we're going to reopen Tryon to vehicular traffic on November 9, and the mural will stay on. We know it's going to weather over time, but we're also going to preserve it and memorialize it. And I'm sure that in the next few days, you all will be receiving some prints of that. But we're going to memorialize it. We've had engagement with Center City partners. I'm going to be having a conversation with our colleagues at Foundations for the Carolinas and Center City this week. We've also had really good conversation with the artists who believe that there's a way we can really memorialize this in our city. But over the next, as the holiday is coming close, we really want to make sure that our businesses continue to thrive. And one of the ways that we really, truly want to do that is by reopening up the street, preserving the artwork itself, and leaving the artwork on the street, but also preserving it in different ways. Going forward, though, we do want to have kind of a study around the reimagination of Tryon Street itself. What exactly does it look like? But we don't want to do that impulsively. It's best to do that once you have the Center City 2040 vision plan rolled out, because one of the recommendations has to do with Tryon Street itself. And how can we work together with the businesses, with the residents, with city partners to make sure that however we choose to reimagine Tryon Street in the future, it's about people, it's about businesses, but it's less about vehicles, and it's really more about creating opportunities for people to have a pedestrian, active environment 365 days a year. So that conversation is ongoing, and we definitely will come back to you to share more with you before we launch into that type of a study. Yes?
Mr. Driggs?
So, Ty, you may be aware that residents on Tryon Street have complained about a lot of the activity there, which is not consistent with the vision you had. It has more to do with crowds of bicycles, motorbikes, and things traveling through, people who live there not feeling very safe. So I was under the impression that we were going to kind of find another location for a memorial like the mural. And now you're saying we're leaving it there and we're opening it up to traffic with the idea that we may close it again?
No, that's not the idea. We're going to reopen the street. Frankly, the concerns that we've had have really dealt more with the closure rather than the mural. And so the mural stays because there's no plan right now in the immediate future to repave the street, but CDOT does have a plan maybe in another year or so to repave that street. But once the street is reopened, we're going to now embark on another phase of what does Tryon really look like going forward, but not necessarily closing this block again. So this block, once it opens on November 2nd, over time the mural itself will weather out.
but you are aware of some of the
Yes.
local complaints about conditions there. So we need to do something that provides for order and that does not let this become a place that Charlotte can't be proud of because it's dominated by elements that are really don't make other citizens feel safe. I mean, it's a matter of policing, or it's a matter of, I don't know what it takes exactly, but I just know from what I've heard that we aren't getting the desired result in terms of a pedestrian zone. So I welcome the idea of reopening it to traffic, but I hope you will be sensitive to the needs of people who live there and not let this become a place where people who don't live there congregate to the detriment of the residents. Thank you.
I've met with them a number of times, and we've also, in the report that you have in front of you, it really documents all of those things, and comparing them to pre-mural installation and during mural installation as well. So we've had complaints, but we've also had a lot of compliments, and it's kind of a very balanced way of looking at it. But one of the things that we're definitely doing going forward is to make sure that no matter what you do with the future of Tryon, we engage everyone in that conversation.
Mr. Winston.
I'm sorry.
Mr.
Who's
Winston
Mr.?
has his hand up.
Who is it?
Mr. Winston.
Mr. Winston?
So I have a question that was kind of germane to what Mr. Driggs brought up, but I just have to step back and say, I don't want to be personal here, but Mr. Driggs, I find what you're saying right now highly disrespectful, that we would choose who wants to gather on our public streets, that we would have a desirable and an undesirable type of person to be there, that any person, regardless of how close you live to a sidewalk or a street, would have some type of ownership. I mean, these are the microaggressions. This, which you just used, is the language of oppression, which has fueled the fire of this nation for centuries. So I hope you will take the opportunity, since this is on live stream, to go back and listen to what you just said and contextualize, that's a word that was used in the previous presentation, how offensive and hurtful and dangerous the type of words that you just used as a sitting council member, a policymaker in the city are. My question for Mr. Jayova is about North Tryon Street and the closing or reopening. You just said all of these statistics of kind of even breaking pre-pandemic numbers. Why are we going to open Tryon Street? With COVID and winter coming, we actually need more open air places for people to socially gather. As we see, people are still socially gathering, and those outdoor spaces are going to naturally shrink because of winter. And why would we take something that is very successful away, given the current events?
So like you see on the next bullet point on this slide that's up right now, while this street may be reopened, will be reopened on November 9, there will continue to be opportunity for us to launch our Street Hits program. Yes, this past weekend, there were activities actually on Tryon, the same thing with the weekend before. And so with the reopening, we believe that it gives us opportunity again to see how the businesses respond to that, how pedestrians respond to that in terms of patronizing some of these businesses outdoor, gives business obviously more capacity as well. So, you know, it does allow us, because if you keep it this way right now, the way we look at it is this, it does create a sense of success, but the success there could actually have been more if we activated that plaza itself by putting different things in there. So how can we reimagine this future of that space by also activating it with other things?
But I agree. So why wouldn't we just keep it closed, since people are coming, and activate the space so we can double down and make it more useful? Why would we take away something that's working and not just build upon it?
So I'll defer to the council discussion on that, direction.
All right, I've got an order of people that have asked me about this. So I think, Mr. Winston, you would ask Mr. Giobbe a question. Did you guys have your exchange? And I'm sorry, I was talking with the clerk.
Yes.
Oh, it's up to us. I got you. Okay. So the next person I had was Ms. Watlington, followed by the Mayor Pro Tem. And then I think Mr. Eggleston as well. And, okay.
First of all, thank you so much for this report. I'm trying to digest it, but it's clear that you all did a lot of work to really understand what the pros are, what the cons are, what some opportunities are. So I appreciate taking time to understand the complexities of this and stratifying the results. And part of that I want to understand here is I see the comments from the residents. As I'm looking on page 12 at this table about responses, I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting this correctly. Only 18% of the residents within that immediate area responded to the survey?
So there's one residential development right there on that block, so that's probably where that is. But in terms of other residents who responded to that, that's within that uptown area. So it's not just on Tryon itself, but even a couple blocks off of Tryon.
Okay, so that's important to me because.
But if you look at another statistic there in terms of survey, you find that the zip code that actually got the most response was uptown zip code. So not just limited to the residents of 230 Tryon.
Okay, that's what's important to me because I did see the comments in here. However, I take 18% to mean that either these were just the most passionate 18% and the others were satisfied. So I'm hesitant to assume that all of the residents feel the way I see some of these comments are going. That doesn't mean that that input's not important and we don't need to do something about it. But I just want to make sure that we're not extrapolating all of this information out to 100% of the population because it looks like a very small amount
And
of
I
the
can
population
quickly
responds.
jump in that I've had 3 different engagements with the residents of that particular block, and it's not overwhelming that there's a complaint. It's a balance. It's a wash. It's almost like 50-50. While there are some who really like it and would like to keep it that way, there are others who will really not want it to be there. In terms of businesses, it's the same. While some other business will say we want it to go, some other business say keep it here because we've really done so well in the last 5 months. But we think we can do better. And that's kind of how the way I see it, that every other successful plaza that you see created, whether it's in Miami or it's in Atlanta or it's in Santa Monica or it's in Denver, they are activated. There are things that bring people there outside of the mural. And I think that we've had success with this one, but can we multiply that success while at the same time we kind of drive up the type of support you have from businesses and residents in the future?
Absolutely. Well, I think this is a great start, and I look forward to the iteration.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Ty, you already really touched on it. It's the activation, because as you know, I probably call you about this about once a week, because it feels a little bit like, it was such a great organic idea that cropped up. But when you look at the successful pedestrian plazas, and I lived in Miami, so near Lincoln Mall, which was fabulous, but it did take time to develop. And I think this situation, because it wasn't activated, to your point, that just causes problems. But I guess the other comment I want to make is that right now with empty streets, and I live close to Uptown, and every single night I hear these motorcycles and the cars that are speeding and doing donuts or whatever on the road. And I just looked at this briefly, but some of the comments in here by the residents were that when the people go away, you've got that kind of activity that comes in here. And that's just something that, we're going to have to deal with and talk to CMPD and deal with in our urban core. I hear it every single night. And it's probably, for me, it's probably 2 or 3 blocks away, 4 or 5 blocks away. So if it's right under your window, I'm sure people would have a hard time with that. So, but that's kind of a COVID thing, and we have to talk about how to address that. But overall, I just feel like this is kind of half-baked still, that if we really want to have a successful pedestrian plaza, we really have to build this out, whether it's here or, as you know, I really am a big fan of Camden because the retail that's on that street is more conducive to street activation. I'm not sure, I always kind of wondered the 3rd and 4th Street corridor right there, how many of those businesses really were that interested in street activation? And if they're not, I just don't know how popular that's going to be there. So I think it's one thing to think about, but you know what? If we don't try things, we're never going to get anywhere. So you try it, you learn from it, and you improve it, or you move on, or you do it somewhere else. So I hope that we can be open to trying these things, reading through this and figuring out what people are saying and helping to address those issues, and really try to make our streets more accessible for all people, because this is public right away. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think the manager wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, but the Mayor Pro Tem stole it. So,
Okay.
exactly. And so what I do want to also put into the room is that Ty has been doing an excellent job reaching out to multiple members of the community. So as we learn from this, as you look at this placemaking program in Uptown, it's not that it's being abandoned. It is there a better place that we could do this, to do all the things that Mr. Winston said and all the things that the Mayor Pro Tem said. So this is, I think we're in a great place and space right now.
I want to say that we have the motorcycles too. I don't know whether is it a CMPD issue or is it a DMV issue where they've taken off the mufflers and added all the special equipment and we have to report. I don't even know how that works, but I was actually on Park Road, same difference. And we've had some complaints from District 4, particularly out on the highway. It's something's going on, and it's like, let's just make as many noisy
Fairview Road,
vehicles
too.
as possible. So with that, Mr. Eggleston.
I'll try to rapid through the responses to a lot of this stuff, but the dirt bikes and stuff have been a problem for several years. That's not new at all, and it's not isolated to any part of town. There's all sorts of problems with trying to address that because CMPD doesn't want to chase them. So we get out in the helicopter and follow them, and they can scatter quickly. That's not really so pertinent to this, but I think that the responses, I'll second what Mr. Winston said. I am, as the representative for half of this mural, and I assume my colleague, Councilmember Graham, who represents the other half of the mural, would agree. I am all in for encouraging people who don't live in Uptown to congregate in Uptown. That's, I think, a large part of the purpose of Uptown. But the problems that have come from this closure, I think, are things that we can work on. One, and I work with a lot of the restaurants downtown, one of the complaints has been that it's confused a lot of their patrons around even things as simple as just where they can pull up to valet their car. So some of the things like that, I think we can work with the restaurants to figure out anecdotal observations, but they've said that they've had people who had a reservation, tried to come uptown, were accustomed to being pull right up in front of the restaurant, and then when they couldn't, got confused and just ended up going somewhere else. Wayfinding and things like that, I think, can help with that. Another complaint that I've heard that I think we can easily address is we have this beautiful mural, and yet we have really crappy looking orange plastic barricades. So in terms of how we block off the street, I think something that's more permanent, or, stone planters or whatever, beautifying the space could certainly help. And then, as far as people riding bikes on it or whatever, if we get more people on bikes, and I mean bicycles, out on our streets, I think that's fine if they're not causing some other problem. And so the data in this report does indicate that some people had some concerns with it, but it also indicated that a nearly equal amount of people felt like they liked it. And I think Ms. Watlington made the point that if you don't feel strongly one way or the other, you probably didn't take the survey anyway. And there's probably a lot of people who think that's a cool piece of public art, but I'm not so, affected by it that I'm motivated to take a survey about it. So I would imagine there's a lot more satisfaction than the survey might indicate, but I do think there's some places where we could pretty easily improve some of the things that the businesses have voiced as concerns. But my more overarching feeling is, like the Mayor Pro Tem said, I think we should be doing things like this. We should be experimenting, taking that information and letting it lead to either broader implementation or identifying things and saying, well, that didn't work the way we hoped it would, and we can try something different the next time. But I would like to see, and I think we should have maybe a larger discussion around identifying the specific concerns and how those could be addressed without necessarily saying we're just going to open it back up to traffic. I think it quickly ceases to be a public art piece if there's cars parked along that block. If there are cars driving over that block, the wear and tear on the mural will undoubtedly be much, much faster as cars are driving over it. So I'd like to see us try to improve what we've got there as opposed to sort of undoing it before we made the decision to open the street back up. But that's just me.
Maybe I can quickly respond to that, Mayor. So we have a plan in place. We've had, prior to making a determination of November 9, we wanted to make sure that we engage the artists. But one thing we had clearly from them was this. It would be hard to recreate the same energy and passion that went into it right at the time it was installed. So how about we take each letter of the mural and have them at different locations of the city? And so we're working with them right now to make sure that we preserve this. But like I said, you also will be receiving individually framed prints of this. Part of my conversation with the foundation will also be that later this week. So we do have a plan in place. But thank you.
I think we ought to sell those prints and donate it to a roof above, sorry. It's just something to think about. Maybe we allow them to have it as a project. So, Mr. Driggs?
I just want to say my comment was about disorderly conduct and about people who live there not feeling safe. Mr. Manager, have you had reports of disorderly conduct in that area?
I don't know exactly what the police reports are. What do you have?
No, we have not. As a matter of fact, in your report.
I know people who filed reports of disorderly conduct in that area, and I think what Ms. Eisel just said suggests there is noise. It's not a question of what race or anything else. It's a question of whether a place is happy and safe or whether people feel uncomfortable there. Maybe this is a matter of better policing or something, but I think the innuendo to the effect that I have some sort of racial bias because I feel that people ought to be allowed to live on that street and not fear for their safety or feel compromised in their enjoyment of their surroundings is not a ridiculous suggestion. And if necessary, I'll produce some of the videos that I've seen of the kind of things that go on there. This is not what we want happening uptown. And the policing is absolutely derelict on this. Nobody is intervening to stop noisy convoys of vehicles from roaring through the streets.
As a matter of fact, last time I met with the residents, Captain Coach was there with me. There was great compliments by the residents and businesses about him. I have
I think
emails.
that's because they expected that the monument would be moved to a better location and that they could look forward to a resumption of life as they had known it.
Well, they also knew when I met with them that the street will be opened no later than December 31 when I met with them weeks ago. So we're actually doing it earlier than we thought that we would, and that wasn't because of any pressure. Yes, I've seen the same video that you probably saw, but you will see in your report, though, that as we looked at it, we looked at pre-closure of the street, and there wasn't really any significant difference in terms of reportings and all of that prior to and during. And that's kind of how you measure that. But having said that, every single incident is important, and the police actually responded to them. There were also concerns about fire, vehicles being able to access the block. As a matter of fact, the last time I met with them, there was a fire incident. There was an incident that involved the fire department coming, but everything went well as expected, as could be expected. But again, without belaboring that, I will ask you to go again into the report, and feel free to share your concerns and ask questions. But as we go forward from this path, we definitely make sure that we engage as many people as possible. And I haven't stopped meeting with the residents and businesses, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So is there a decision that you need council to take today? I mean, I agree with the next steps here, and I appreciate the work, Taiwo, your team has done, certainly appreciate the outreach. So is there an action that we need to take today?
No, I'm not asking for an action. I just wanted to update you on this and what the next steps are with where we go. What I will do is, once we have a conversation going with regards to reimagining the future of Tryon, we definitely will come back to you at that time to let you know what that broader vision looks like. But that will probably not be until January or February.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next topic?
Okay.
Still,
I'm sorry. Who said still? All
That's-
right, Mr. Winston?
So I never got a good answer. Mr. Jehovah's answer about why we should open it on November 9th and not keep it closed for longer was part of the council discussion. And I haven't heard any rationale for opening it, especially given that we need more outdoor spaces for COVID and winter. Why would we take one away? Do I need to make a motion to keep the stretch of Tryon where the Black Lives Matter mural is closed until the December 31st date?
I mean, that will be left to you, but our goal has always been that this was a pilot, and we were going to use it to gather some data to help us know how we can better treat plazas for better pedestrian activities. We feel that we've gathered enough data. We feel that our goals, like I stated here, have been accomplished, frankly speaking, with regards to what we wanted to do. But the reason why we had said December 31 was because we did not want to come up with a date that we will not be sure about. So when we said December 31, we said no later than. But in the meantime, we started to work with the artists. We started to put this report together, found out that we could actually open it back up sooner rather than later. So that's why we're where we are today. But as regards to what council does, I think I'll leave that to you.
I make a motion to keep Tryon Street between 3rd and 4th closed to vehicular traffic until at least December 31st, 2020.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eggleston has second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, we've got Mr. Bakari, followed by Ms. Watlington.
I just want to be clear, because I didn't realize we were going to have to make a decision. It's staff's recommendation, your recommendation not to do that, right?
So right now, I'm not making it. I'm just providing an update to all of you.
Well, if we didn't vote out of being surprised that we weren't planning on it, you would have moved forward on your own path to do that.
We will have opened it back up on November 9. And I'll tell you the reason, again, why we were doing that was not just to gather data, but I also understand that we are entering the holiday season for those same restaurants along this, especially in that block. And I'm being mindful of that, because in my conversation with the businesses last week, they said that this is really the high season for them. And so being mindful of that, I felt that November 9 would be a good time to reopen the street up. If council decides to extend that further, we will have to have another conversation with those businesses.
Well, we have a not an optimal track record on council sometimes of just making decisions based on our emotion. And I think sometimes we ignore what staff is telling us. I'm not at all trying to wade into any of the softer parts of this discussion, which are very valid on both fronts. And in fact, I love the placemaking angle of this and how you're learning and how we're going to try to go forward. But the bottom line is, if you look at your survey, residents have, almost a double non-favorable versus favorable view of this. They have businesses. The one I'm most concerned about is, a significant amount more people said their revenue has decreased. 3 times the amount revenue has decreased than it has increased or stayed flat during the time frame of all of this stuff. So I like Councilmember Eggleston's points of there are ways we can tweak this and do it better, but that's part of the pilot process. So I would prefer that we continue forth with your recommendation and learn from this and move to the next steps in a planned way rather than get a gut reaction of like, well, let's keep it because we want to keep it. And I don't think that's fair to you guys who are doing all this work.
I'm sorry, I really skipped a step. The city attorney and I have had a number of conversations since our meeting that we had on virtual meetings about presiding at these meetings and the ability to take action and what's expected. So the first question that I should have asked, is there anyone that objects to having this voted on tonight, or should it move to the next agenda? Because that's where the issue is, and Mr. Baker and I are trying to make sure that I follow the rules appropriately, because we...
I object.
Yeah, so I think it requires a unanimous, it was not on the agenda. Strategy sessions are specifically around discussion items and no votes being anticipated. So I want to just make sure
So we have
that...
to have something on the agenda just to tell our staff what to do? I mean,
As a council, to direct them to do this, it would take a majority vote of the council, since the staff did not do this. And so what we have is a motion that we had not planned on having, and if anyone objects that they're unready to address this motion, it just means it's a week from now. That doesn't mean, I mean, it's just a week away for the next.
It'll be open by then. And if staff.
I think the
staff
manager
has not, if staff can't put us in a corner where we can't do our job.
We will pause, Mr. Winston, I think the manager will pause this. He's not going to take action if there is a vote on it in the next week. So all I'm saying is that I have to follow the procedures so that we're very, we don't have the nuances of confusion about something that people were not prepared to vote on tonight. So I'm going to ask, the question is, this is not on our agenda for a vote. Is there anyone that objects to the item, the motion being made tonight? We have 2 objections. So following our rules, the manager will not close the street. It will be on our next agenda for an action.
I have a question about procedure. I mean, transportation updates is on our agenda, and this is part of the transportation updates that is on our agenda. So since it is on our agenda, why can't we vote on something regarding an agenda?
Because you have 2 people that are not ready to take the vote, and it's one of the things is no surprises. I mean, you don't want those surprises to happen to you. I don't want them to happen to any council member that thought that they had a
But it's not a surprise. It's on our agenda. This is part of our agenda.
It's not an action item, and our strategy sessions are specifically around this idea. If we had unanimous support, Mr. Winston, I'd be glad to have the vote. But we do not have it. The manager will not close it. It'll be on our next agenda. Thank you. I saw Mr. Baker wringing his hands over there, and so I'm not going to go through that kind of effort without having the council. What information do you need to be ready to, or in addition to the information that you have tonight, to be ready to consider this item? Ms. Watlington, followed by Mayor Pro Tem.
And we also have Ms. Ajmira and then Mr. Newton.
All right.
Okay, so 2 things. The first one is I definitely want to sit down with you and understand a little bit more about that, because I want to make sure that I'm clear about the rules of procedure in regards to what is germane to the agenda, what's action, all of that, because I thought I was clear, but it sounds like I'm not. The second thing is what I would need to know is, are there anything, a couple of things. Number one, is there anything that is a barrier or a threat in regards to leaving it open that needs to be addressed right now? We talked about some CMPD things. What can we put in place that would assuage some of the information in here that residents have in terms of their fears or their complaints about noise, their complaints about loitering, those kinds of things? I'd need to be confident that those things are addressed, or at least understand what the plan is so that I can make a decision in regards to that. The other piece is many of the things that Councilmember Eggleston said earlier about businesses. If we can put a plan together that that would address the major issues, or I'll say the urgent issues in regards to keeping it open, that would be helpful to me to be able to make a decision.
And that is open until December 31st, correct? Okay. All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
I joined Ms. Watlington in her comments that I'd like to know a little bit more about what it would take to keep it open, or what are the ramifications of keeping it shut. That's why I struggle with these last-minute votes, is because I usually need more information. In this case, I'd like to know, we are going into the winter months, how many of the restaurants would have planned on having tables outside? Are they going to have space heaters? You know, I mean, would we be activating those spaces? And activating those spaces means that the restaurants or the businesses there would have to be part of doing that. Otherwise, who's activating it? Do we even have a budget to activate it? And so I would like to tie this, if we open it, I'd like to tie it to trying it somewhere else like Camden. So coming up with a plan. And we've been talking about it, but we can't get this off the ground in terms of looking at moving it somewhere else or trying it somewhere else. So that's why I struggle with making a decision tonight until we have more information.
All right, Mr. Newton?
And you can also add Ms.
I'm
Johnson.
sorry.
You can also add Ms. Johnson.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Ms. Johnson was going to go ahead of me, or is it my turn?
No, it's your turn. Mr. Newton, I've got Ms. Johnson now.
I just wanted to weigh in and say that I'm not comfortable voting on this either. I think I've gotten a newfound appreciation for our process and our procedures, making sure that we are fully informed, and we do have an item on the agenda that we're aware of in the past. And I can go back to a strategy session we had about, 5 weeks ago, where we were talking about dedicated bus lanes on Central, where, much like tonight, we had an item that was very generally, broadly placed in our agenda, but we didn't have specifics. And with this one right here, I think what we had in our agenda was transportation update. We didn't get the attachment, any specifics to this until literally right at the moment that we started the meeting tonight. I don't think that, so I'm inclined to want to keep the street closed, to preserve the sanctity of the mural. Having said that, we can still do that as we wait for the next meeting, because from what I'm hearing you say, Madam Mayor, the street's not going to be open. The city manager is going to ensure that it won't be open before that next meeting and our ability to take the vote then. So I just wanted to weigh in with those comments and my opinion, that angle on why I don't feel comfortable moving forward with this vote right now.
All right, Ms. Hajimura?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I just want to be clear on the process. I think it's fair that the manager's not going to make any decision and allow us until November 9th to vote on it. However, I want to understand from a voting perspective why we would not be able to vote on this tonight if it is on the agenda. So if Mr. Baker can get us that rule.
I'd love to.
Went through this.
The issue is what is on the agenda, what's not on the agenda. And what you have on the agenda, as has been said, is transportation updates. But there's nothing in the agenda that would give the public any reason to believe that you're going to vote on anything. So I strongly encourage you to have an agenda that specifically says what it is that you're going to do that night. There are going to be situations where you may want to, address something that you all agree needs to be addressed immediately. And in that situation, that's fine. Otherwise, if someone has an objection, keep in mind you're always just a week away from having it on an agenda if it doesn't pop up at this current time. But I would just discourage you all, unless everyone is in agreement for these agenda items that sort of spring out of another conversation that's not on the agenda, because the main part of the agenda not only is to inform you all about what you're about to do, but also to inform the public about what they can expect at the meeting as well. And that gets lost by these sort of spontaneous motions.
I'm sorry, Mr. Winston, let me just finish. I'm still confused because that ties our hands. I've been on council for a year, and this is maybe the third time this has happened. I would expect, as council, we are always positioned that we can make a decision. So
You are positioned to make a decision if you all agree to make that decision tonight. Otherwise, if there's something that you all want, an individual wants on the agenda, that can be added to a future agenda, which is always essentially a week away.
Right, but this item is on the, if it's on the agenda.
Not for a vote.
Talk about it.
It's not an action item.
It's actually, the agenda says transportation updates. It does not say recommend adoption of an action. I think that's the difference, is that, again, it's to respect each other for no surprises, that if someone's uncomfortable with making a vote immediately, then we try to do it in a way that respects each other. And I don't know, I think aside from Mr. Baker, I try to look at it as if I have a colleague that says that they need additional information before they can make a decision, I would try to do that. I think we all try to get information out and so that people can have it. But the agenda today says updates. It does not say take an action. Ms. Johnson
It's
said.
a verb, it's an action. And that's what my motion did, was to be update this transportation plan. And it's a surprise to me that I'm unable to do that on the agenda item that says that we should be doing that. So it is a surprise to me. So it's one way or the other, I guess somebody is going to be surprised.
Madam Mayor, can I also make a comment?
I'm not going to try to replay the discussion about the votes and the actions and the procedures. I think that we've learned that we're probably going to have some areas of disagreement here, but I'm trying to respect the process, the procedures, and the people that said, I'm not prepared to do it right now, that have asked for additional information.
Madam
With
Mayor.
that, the manager asked me to recognize him.
Well, before we do that, I wasn't finished. So what
I'm sorry.
If nobody can talk, then no one can talk.
I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. So what we attempted to do tonight, after a good deal of surveys and discussions with staff, with different members of the community, was to come back to council with a plan that would open back up Tryon Street, which, if I'm not mistaken, we closed it without council action, and we also had the mural painted without council action.
Right.
So we came back after a lot of staff research with the concept of opening it back up and then learning from that and potentially replacing it, potentially trying to do something that could be a win-win-win. And for, the agenda tonight, we'll pause on all of that because it appears that the council wants to take a vote on this, so we'll do nothing prior to that vote taking place.
All right, so I had Mr. Graham, followed by Mr. Driggs.
Well, I'll keep it short and simple, Madam Mayor, and to my other partner, District 1, that owns half of the street as well. I thought the presentation was very, very good. I thought we were moving in the right direction. We all knew it was a pilot program. There is some language there about street eats, which gives people an opportunity with heaters, I would imagine, Mayor Pro Tem, to still be able to socially distance outside. We gathered all the information that we need for this pilot program. December 31st is, just like weeks away. So I'm not sure there's a big difference between the 9th and the 31st. Obviously, there's weeks, but, not a big difference. And more importantly, Ty is right, I've heard from residents along the area, my constituents, for and against. I think it's probably 50-50. But I've heard a lot from the restaurant owners there, for sure. And they need a break so they can recoup some income during the holiday season. I just don't understand why we keep going down the rabbit hole.
All right, Mr. Driggs.
Thank you. I just want to point out, I think Mr. Winston has successfully objected to the suggestion that staff makes this decision. and has put out there the idea that council should make this decision. And I think you've won on that, right? We're going to consider it next week. I just want to make the point that the issue about not taking decisions that are unannounced, that were not announced, is simply a member of the public who saw update on the agenda would feel that they could just watch this meeting and they would get everything out of it that they needed. An individual who sees vote on the agenda is going to sign up to speak, and we cannot deny them that right. So in this situation, I don't see the harm in taking on board Mr. Winston's suggestion, moving it to next week, not taking any action on closing the street next week, and then having council consider this in an orderly fashion, including giving members of the public the opportunity to speak before we make the decision. It doesn't seem that complicated to me. But that's the reason that we don't do things all at once, because we need to announce the intention to take action on an issue, and we need to give the public and members of council time to prepare for the conversation at the time, or to speak, when that decision is going to be made. So I think your suggestion that we just not take any action and vote next week ought to be acceptable to everybody. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Eggleston?
Yeah, I largely agree with the sentiment of Mr. Winston's motion, but I also agree with Mr. Driggs that the reason, and there seems to be a lot of confusion around it, but that is the main reason, is if people don't expect that there's going to be a vote, A, council members don't have the opportunity to ask all the questions and get all the information they need to make that decision, and B, the public doesn't have the opportunity to speak to the decision that we're making because they didn't know we were going to be making a decision. So I do agree with going through that process on something that's not so simple as to have unanimous agreement on the council that we move on it on the same night that it's brought up that we should take action. As far as the information, I would like, before we make that decision, I hope that staff will, and I know you've done this to some extent, so part of it might be compiling information you already have, and I know some of it's in here, but I don't know that all of it is. Again, the conversations I've heard, one of the big things has been the valet parking. Another has been that it looked more permanent or substantive, that just the orange barricades out there are kind of an eyesore. So I hope that if we, as a council, are taking action, or we are voting on whether or not to extend the closure, that the extension of the closure would come, along with that would come ideas around identifying a solution for valet, identifying a solution for something more permanent and, I guess, aesthetically pleasing than orange barricades and paper, orange paper signs that say no parking. I would not be in favor of extending the closure if we don't have some ways we think we can improve the things that we have heard are the problems. So I do think we can do that, and then I would be in favor of extending it. But I hope that those come as a package deal, because to just extend it and not address the concerns we've heard, I think would be a bad path to take.
Ms. Watlington? Okay. I just wanted to say that I'm not quite sure if we have this information. We had a lot of survey information, so before we do this vote, I think we need to make sure that we share it with the people who are impacted by it as widely and as broadly as we can. I think that that's something that's important to do. The second thing is I really haven't done a lot of work on this, but listening, I think we are getting two things. Is this the only place that we want to see activation, or are there other options and priorities for that, Mr. Jones? So I don't know. I was down on past the Blumenthal, the next block, and they've got these wooden fences where the re-rise in that block. There are some other things that are going on in the center city that may be actually more valuable to people. I think it needs a little bit broader conversation than just the block where Black Lives Matter is the mural is. I just don't, and I also think it needs to have a broader conversation around where do we think is the gathering space. If you go to Romare Bearden Park, almost any given day, UC activation. It's not the same kind of thing where it's producing the restaurants and everything that we would probably have closer to Tryon Street. But I would like for us to really think about this as an issue of business, appropriate activation in what part of the center city, and then finally, the idea of the mural being, in some ways, allowing those artists to continue to grow and prosper by activating other areas across the city. I think that it's one of those things that I would ask the artists. And I think that's an important part. They're the folks that created this opportunity for us to have that moment in time where we could have people really come down and say, look how this matters. But I think that we ought to include the artists in the information as well. So with that, I think we're ready for the next update. I'm sorry, who is it? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Newton raised his hand again.
Mr. Newton, I think we're done with the discussion. Is it on this topic or another one?
Just have one more comment on this topic,
Okay.
Madam Mayor. I wanted to agree with my colleagues on giving this some more time so that we can vet this more thoroughly, get more information, speak with community members, but I just can't lose sight of the irony in the conversation because that time was not afforded weeks ago when we were discussing the Central Avenue bus pilot. And I can tell you this, that the disruption and the confusion within the community that has resulted without that vetting process is absolutely palpable. And I do think that moving forward, we need to be more cognizant of these procedures and these policies so that we can operate in a way where we're fully informed and the community is engaged at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all right. Ty,
Okay.
please.
Well, thank you. Let's move on to probably an easier subject. This talk. Can you advance the slide to the next topic? The next one is Silver Line. Next slide, please.
Oh, hold on, I'm sorry. Okay, try now.
Okay. If you recall, in December of 2019, we came to you to talk about $50 million that we needed to be able to advance the work on the Silver Line. And at that point in time, we had said we were going to come to you again in about 12 months later to give you an update. And in June, I provided updates on the Silver Line along with our CEO of CATS, John Lewis, and Liz Babson of CDOT. So the next couple items are Silver Line, Central, as well as Gold Line, Phase 2. But on this particular subject, if you will recall, it's different from the Blue Line that we have today in that it's longer. It's a 26-mile program, but it's also multi-county. It's really from Union, Mecklenburg, all the way to Gaston County, to Belmont in Gaston County, passing by the airport. Because of the length and the scale of this work, we've had to engage differently. So we actually broke this into about 6 different focus areas, and we had engagement on each focus areas because obviously, as you will note on this map, they're very different. So in September, CATS wrapped up the second round of public engagement with pretty much virtual, online, and we had open houses, one for each area on this map. Now, this particular slide is very interesting because some of you may be familiar with the locally preferred alternative for the what we call the LPA for the entire corridor. The goal, obviously, is where we are right now about refining all of them. And what we've done is the purpose of the refinement, first of all, is to ask different questions. On which side of the street will the light rail be on? What roads are going to be impacted in terms of configuration? Where are the bridges on the corridor? How will people access the stations? And how will the light rail itself operate? So using different types of evaluation, which you subject an LPA to, we identified about 100 different potential refinements. That's a lot, even for a segment of this, a corridor of this length. And those refinements that we've been doing address the risk of the corridor, the different uncertainties, or maybe some missed opportunities in the originally approved locally preferred alternative that we did not really think about before. So right now, what we're doing is analyzing those potential refinements, and then at the end of the day, come up with one single alignment. And once that alignment is refined, then we're going to also be getting public input, the Metropolitan Transit Commission approval, and then we're going to begin to do more of design and environmental work in the next year. So that's what you see on the 2021 piece of the calendar here, that we envision that we're going to complete about 5% of the design and the conceptual, and come up with a conceptual cost range early in 2021. This is a schedule, and you will see that the duration itself hasn't changed, but the timeline has shifted a little bit for a couple of reasons. One, it took us about 3 months to work out the contractual negotiations and different documentation that we needed to do. It was during the midst of this COVID-19 also hit us, so we had to push forward to a degree. And then what you see in the red block is we had the RNC conflicts also that contributed to the delay, to a delay in the second round of public meetings. So while the duration has stayed the same, the plan initially was to actually have the work done by October, but that work is now going to be done. Again, if you look in the last slide, where I said that we will complete the 5% design and have a conceptual cost range by March of 2021. So we are working on the third round of public meetings right now, that we're planning that for January of 21. At this point, considering where we have with regards to the spike in the coronavirus, it's still going to stay virtual. But the purpose of it is really to present what we call the refined LPA, the locally preferred alternative, to the public at that time, and then go before the Metropolitan Transit Commission and yourselves by March of 2021. So essentially, by the time we come back to you in early 21, we'll have a cost range of what exactly, we have a cost range, a conceptual cost range of what this Silver Line will cost, and we also have an idea what that line alignment actually looks like. Before I move on to the next one, I don't know if there's any question on the Silver Line. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Taiwo, help us understand how community input will be weighed with regards to the alternatives to the LPA. So, for example, a segment that involves the Mora advocates, they're putting a lot of work into it. And as you know, they're a pretty informed group. They've really spent a lot of time on this. There are neighbors on that side who would like to see the line run on their side of Independence. And of course, there's going to be neighbors on the other side. So is it just going to come down to cost? Because I guess that to me is still vague. How do you take that input from residents and say, okay, yeah, you know what, we're going to go with their idea or their preference?
It's not, I know Andy Mark, who is a project manager, is on, and I will let him speak to this. But it's not just about the cost. It's also going to be, where do you have opportunities for transit-oriented development? Obviously, community concerns and input. Oh, I see Mr. Lewis is here, so that's even better. And so it's really a variety of, and a combination of factors that really will determine what eventually that corridor looks like. We've also been doing our own internal conversations as well as to how do you measure the cost-benefit analysis of this entire corridor, understanding that at the end of the day, residents' input in the process matters, but also where do we have opportunities that we can take advantage of for a transit-oriented development opportunities. I want to add to that. Okay.
Yeah, so to that, that particular segment worries me as well, and I'm trying to understand if you're going to come back and say, here's what we're going to recommend to MTC, because what I don't want is to have you guys come and say, well, MTC approved it, So we can't undo it. But for example, I think it would be a crime to run through McAlpine Parkway, go through that park. That is, that's a southeastern regional asset for running clubs and for high school tournaments, major high school tournaments. And it'd be fantastic if it ran on Monroe Road there and dropped runners off, at the beginning of the park. But if we talk about our comprehensive plan and how much, we talk about valuating green space, it would also just be a crime to intersect right through that park. So I don't know where that comes into play and how much that weighs in the decision. And if we get a say, if we get to have a say in that.
Absolutely. Mayor Pro Tem John Lewis, Executive Director of CATS. Some of the issues that you've identified are the exact issues we've heard from the community and we're evaluating. We will take each one of those focus areas through a pretty detailed risk and opportunity matrix. And in each one of those opportunities or risk, we will evaluate if this alignment has X number of risk, X number of benefits. And those are also cost, operational abilities, our ability to operate effectively and cost effectively. Also run through the measurements of other city goals. Doesn't meet our transit-oriented development goals, doesn't maximize our ability to invest in affordable housing. So each one of those areas, within those focus areas, and each one of those alignments will go through that filter and we'll evaluate it based upon that. Then we will bring our recommendations to both the MTC and council before they are enacted upon. But also finally, in that, it may be that we go through all of this and it may be in certain focus areas or in certain communities or neighborhoods, we may decide to take more than one alignment to the next level of design. Because we may go through this and say, we can't clearly identify what the risk and the benefits are until we go through another level of design in that regard. So our goal is to minimize. On the previous slide, you saw the fat line going through the spaghetti bowl of lines as we are. Our goal is to minimize the number of alternatives we want to take into advanced design on this. But it may be that we can't get to that objective.
Okay, well, I appreciate that council will have an opportunity to weigh in before it goes to a vote, or it is proposed to MDTC for approval.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have anybody virtual? Ms. Jackson? Any other comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, the next subject is the goal line, phase 2, and this is really, again, at a high level, but my colleagues, Fiori and Jennifer, are available to answer specific questions that you may have on this one. But right now, we have pedestrians walking on both sides of Hawthorne Bridge, so it will be open to traffic, as we had said before, by the end of this year, or at the end of this year, we will have it open to traffic. We expect that the Charlotte Area Transit System will begin revenue service in early 2021 because construction will be substantially completed by that time. And as you know, the testing takes a minimum of 90 days to happen. So we believe that at the end of this year, Hawthorne Bridge will be open to traffic, and then early in 2021, we'll begin to have revenue service for the Gold Line streetcar itself. Any question? Yes, sir.
You mind if I ask a question?
I think the manager wanted to have some comments about the goal line first.
Right. So, Mayor, members of council, I know that you have been getting a number of emails with frustration about the project, and I think we've all been frustrated with the project. I had a quick conversation with the city attorney earlier today, and we will be engaging with the community and seeing what we can do as it relates to some of the issues that they have been going through. So I just wanted to let you know that I have spoken with the attorney, and a group of us will interact with the community to see what can be done.
So I think that Mr. Eggleston probably has have lived experience, is that what the name of that is, about this project? But I think all of us are really very well informed from the neighbors' letters. I think, Mr. Jones, what we're really trying to do is stop saying anything that's not actually feasible to be done, but also to pay attention to the life circumstances that these folks have gone through with foundational issues settling their building, when they talk about landscaping, when they talk about repairs of their yards and their materials. And I just really believe that community conversation with the staff is more important, and it can't wait until it's time to file a report with risk management, or it's time to do this. This has just gone on so very long that these folks deserve TLC, actually, in every aspect of what we're doing with them. So with that, Mr. Eggleston, you want to go ahead and talk about your lived experience?
Yeah. First, I appreciate the mayor did come out and walk with me and some of the neighbors a handful of weeks or a month or two ago and look at some of the issues. And they were very, very appreciative of you being there, Mayor, so thank you for that. I do think, one quick question, Ty, when you say open to traffic by the end of the calendar year for vehicle traffic, can neighborhood residents expect, or can anybody expect to see the testing starting almost nearly concurrent with the opening to vehicle traffic?
Phil Rieger, our Director of General Services, is here, but my understanding is that you have to complete the project substantially before you can do the testing. And so that may push that into early 2021, not the end of this year.
Okay, so there's some amount of work between when we can open it to vehicle traffic and when we can put the streetcars on to test them?
Yes.
Okay. So that's maybe 3 different times that would be helpful to identify. I do think when we put the streetcars out there and start testing them, that will be a huge landmark in our timeline for people visually to see that there really is light at the end of this. And I think it will change the narrative, because I'm convinced that at least half our city still thinks we're going to put the Rice-A-Roni trolleys back out there. And when they see the modern streetcars that look more like our light rail cars, I think it will change people's perceptions of what we are bringing forward in this project in a way that's going to be very beneficial to the project. To the mayor's final point there around the issues that people have been having with damage to their homes, I do think, and I don't have a great solution, and I will preface with saying Phil and team have been great in terms of responsiveness, engaging the community, not only from my vantage point, but from some of the neighbors that I talk to frequently's vantage points. I don't have a great idea, but we do have to figure out something to calm the fears of the neighbors, that the concerns they have around the damage that they believe this construction project has caused their homes is going to be addressed in a way that's sufficient, because, and frankly, I don't blame them for being skeptical. We as an organization, and I include all of us in that, have not done as good of a job as we could have or should have in managing this project, I don't think. And I'm certain that the contractor has not done an acceptable job on this project. And if I were a neighbor who felt like I was starting to see cracks in my house that I'd never seen in the decade or 2 or 3 that I'd lived there before, and my house is shaking every day because of the construction of this project, that's not a difficult line to draw for them between the construction and the damage. And if I also knew that I was dealing with a contractor who couldn't properly measure a bridge, I would be skeptical too that my claim was ever going to be settled in a satisfactory way. So I don't know how we can address those fears, but I don't blame neighbors for having them, because everything they've been told for however many years it's been going on has not played out the way that we said it would or the way that it should. So I don't know why they would expect that the claims process is going to play out the way that it should or the way that we're saying it's going to. And I think at this point, what the community is going to be left with, both in the public space but also on their private property, is probably the overriding concern more so than anything else. And I think that's the one that we've got to be most focused on, in addition to obviously putting a bow on this and having the construction over with.
Well, thank you.
All right. Mr. Graham.
Just a quick technical question, and in reference to the testing. Will a delay on one side of the track impact testing on the other side, i.e. the Johnson C. Smith University side versus the Hawthorne Bridge? So if there's a delay over there, does that delay the whole testing of the whole line?
So Mr. Lewis is the expert on this, but my understanding is that when you install the catenary or the overhead wires, you want to do them for the two sides of the alignment so that you can run the testing at the same time rather than at different times. And the overhead wires for this will be installed in early 21 as well. So I believe it's going to be at the same time unless I'm hearing otherwise.
Thank you, Councilman. Part of the testing that we have to do is not just the infrastructure. And so even though the bridge may open earlier and all of the construction work, we're not just testing the power source, but also the systems and communications along the line. And so we ultimately have to certify the entire corridor. Depending on what we may see, there are areas where we may be able to begin or testing on one side of the corridor, while minor issues may be being dealt with on another side of the corridor. But ultimately, we have to run that test from one end to the other.
So the conversation we had last week, does this presentation change any of the things that we talked about in terms of testing and starting and et cetera?
No, I believe, and we're taking forward that once they reach substantial completion under this schedule right now, we will begin testing along the entire corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Do I have anybody online, Ms. Jackson? A virtual, Ms. Jackson? Okay, hearing nobody here virtually, I think that's it, Mr. Jones? One more.
One more to
Okay.
go. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. It's probably the easiest one of the night.
I don't think you should leave, Mr. Lewis. Pull up a chair, enjoy yourself for a while. Sit down and have a moment.
This time I'm going to ask Mr. Lewis and Ms. Babson to join me. But Councilmember Newton referred to this earlier on, the Central Avenue bus pilot study, but I want to take us back to 2017 when we had the Envision My Ride and bus priority conversations, and I know a lot of things get lost over time. But at that time, we started to talk about when you're going to implement the Envision My Ride, which is really about making our busing system better, and including some areas where we actually can have dedicated lanes to run buses. So all the way through February of this year, as we started to engage different people, this was a subject that was discussed. Back in June, when the three of us updated council about transportation and transit, we had also discussed this, which ultimately led to your decision on September 8th for the Central Avenue bus pilot study, which really is a 6-month pilot study that will allow us to gather more information with regards to how you can operate perhaps a future streetcar in dedicated lane on this corridor. The question, of course, is why now? We installed the first phase, which is the 4th Street pilot, back in December of 2019, and that has been very successful, and it continues to operate even today. Understanding that this second phase is challenging, but there are certain reasons why we felt that this would be a good time to actually implement dedicated bus lane on Central. Number one, the low traffic volumes, which really allowed us to be able to implement on the lower traffic, less congestion, and perhaps safer conditions. The second thing is that it does allow us to gather some data, just like we said about the Tryon pilot. This also allows us to gather some data on how does it really work when you have a transit system operating in a dedicated right-of-way along a busy corridor or along a corridor that has residents and businesses. What does it look like even for a future streetcar system to be able to operate along this corridor? So gathering data, whether they are talking to people or understanding how riders get on and off, the relationship between the transit system, bicycles and people and vehicles who use the roadway. It's very important for us to be able to analyze what transit future looks like along Central Avenue. So right now we continue to gather data. We're looking at turning movements. We're looking at what's happening to traffic along Central, any impact on our neighborhood streets, on adjacent streets, what's going on with regards to enforcement, bicycle, pedestrian counts. We're looking at traffic data by lane. We've had a lot of complaints from people that there are some drivers who are using the dedicated lane to really speed. We're getting a lot of that information. While we know that that's uncomfortable, that's a concern, and that's a complaint, it's part of the data gathering process for us, so that eventually when we come to you, we'll have full gamut of information that we can share with you. But it also allows us to know what the travel time will be compared to if this bus was stuck in traffic. What exactly would travel time be? What will the ridership look like? How fast is the bus able to operate within that dedicated lane? And how can we continue to make sure that we observe the interactions between the bus system and the lane? So in December, we're going to have preliminary information on the data that we've been gathering to share with the Transportation Planning and Environmental Committee, but also be able to share with them some of the things that we've been hearing from the community. The goal is that at the end of the day, we want to position this corridor for success when it comes to a future installation of a streetcar system if we are successful in getting funding for that. And this helps us to be able to achieve that. This time I will stop here, and then if there are questions, I'll be glad to entertain them, but also, like I said, I have my colleague here, CEO of CAT, Mr. John Lewis, and also a director of CDOT, Ms. Babson, who can answer specific questions. Thank you.
All right, we're going to start with Mr. Newton, and anyone else in the room? Or I think we have Mr. Newton first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As I mentioned before, this dedicated bus pilot has created an awful lot of disruption, confusion in the community. There's fear within the community when we're talking about enforcement. You know, the area here from Eastway down to Albemarle Road, it's our immigrant corridor. And so I know that there has been a lot of abuse of the lanes, and there's talk now of enforcement measures and our immigrant community. Now, I speak with many representatives of the community on a weekly, if not more frequent basis, and they're explaining to me that immigrant voices, these folks don't feel comfortable speaking up, but there's certainly concerns and fear that are associated with these lanes. Now, having said all of that, I understand that, the devil's always in the details here, right? And it's always in how the terminology is used, things are explained to us. Saying something like the subject was discussed, I think, certainly bus pilot lanes, but the idea that this was something that was, directed to any of our attention 2 months ago in a strategy session, in as much as this specific location is concerned, no, that wasn't the case. Now, I need to point that out because I'm actually very offended if that is the assertion being made. Now, I wanted to ask a question about Phase 3 because, it is my understanding this is simply a pilot where we're gathering some information. And I had the opportunity to speak with staff members about this last week to get a little bit more clarity on the intentions and the goals of this, particularly as it pertains to future projects and maybe the use of that information. But can you tell me a little bit more about Phase 3 here that I'm seeing on the slide in front of us right now? And if that is, so is that a phase that we're saying is going to be a part of this pilot within the 6-month period?
Councilman, if I can make sure I understand your question, are we talking about Phase 3 of the Central Avenue pilot, or are we talking about Phase 3 of the Gold Line?
Central Avenue pilot. Yeah, so, I wasn't aware of these phases either. It's like there's more and more information that comes to my attention. There's more that is shared with me literally every week about this that I was not aware of. This is one more thing. I don't even know what this means. So it's my understanding, I guess we're in the Central Avenue pilot, which is Phase 2. What is Phase 3, and is that a part of the Central Avenue pilot itself for 6 months that we've been, I guess that's now been presented to me over the past month and a half?
So to answer your question, the Central Avenue corridor, the entire corridor itself, is one of the corridors that we have been taking a look at over the last year or so for higher priority bus operations, along with other corridors like Providence, West Boulevard, Wilkinson, et cetera. The council, you may remember, just a couple of meetings ago, authorized our bus priority study that will go into more detail for all of these corridors. And so when we took a look at Central, we started with the 4th Street corridor, which quite frankly was the easiest corridor for us to pilot a bus-only lane, since there weren't any residences along that corridor. As we reported back to council in December, after a several-month pilot on that, we were able to quantify the increase in bus speed, quantify the minimal impact to traffic. Now, that corridor at 4th Street has a different cross-section than Central Avenue, and as we wanted to continue working out from Uptown, the middle phase, which goes through Plaza Midwood, has some very significant challenges from a capital and operation standpoint. It is much more narrow in that corridor, and there's the significant obstacle of the freight railroad crossing. And so that needed some in-depth study, and that's what our consultant study is looking at. Are there ways that we could, in the future, implement this type of high-priority bus lane if we can solve those problems? The third phase, which is the phase that we are in the implementation of now, was just quite frankly an easy, met 2 goals. Number one, we were able to pretty easily pilot the transit-only lane with minimal impact to traffic because of the median space that you see there. And then the second issue was one that Mr. Gioba mentioned, was the need to gather the necessary data to help position Phase 3 of the Gold Line project, which is our intention in order to be successful in going after federal funding. We really need to maximize trip speed through the corridor, and a streetcar that is over 10 miles long operating in street traffic, we will get very minimal trip savings in terms of time along that corridor. So this enabled us to answer 2 questions. The bus priority study, lane that we could use that data to inform other corridors, but also the preliminary investigation of transit-only lane for Gold Line Phase 3.
So a number of points here. One is, this isn't apples to apples. I think that's something that is it's very important to note the 4th Street pilot, as you had mentioned, 4 lanes, right? You take 1 lane away, people can still pass. Makes a whole lot of sense. Right here on this corridor between Eastway and Albemarle Road, it's only 2 lanes. People can't pass. It's very difficult. If someone needs to turn left, the traffic backs up. That's why people are using the bus lane to pass. I think that that's a very important distinction to make, that this is not an apples-to-apples comparison, and you're not working out, right? In this instance, we're looking at the last mile. We talked about that last mile. We're looking at the last mile. We have all this territory in between. But my question was about phase 3, because when I read the slide, it says we'll look at implementing a priority treatment along the entire Central Avenue corridor, right? Which I'm assuming is from downtown all the way to Albemarle. And I'm kind of wondering to myself, are we talking about an extension of this pilot? And is that going to happen within the 6 months, or are you talking about this happening after 6 months, which is something else that I think is completely foreign to me and that I haven't heard at all?
No, this will come back as the Phase 3, which is the portion from 4th Street out through Plaza Midwood, will be a part of the report out that we will get from our consulting team as in concert with all the other corridors that they are evaluating as a part of the bus priority study. It will not be a follow-up to this 6-month pilot.
Okay, because that's what I thought you explained to me last week when we met, when all of us met, me and you guys, talking about this particular pilot and how it's just a 6-month pilot to gather the information to better position ourselves at a later date for Gold Line. That makes a lot of sense, right? Because at this point in time, we don't know what Eastland is going to bring. We don't know, well, one thing we do know is that it's certainly going to heighten traffic. That's why I kind of question the wisdom in us moving forward on this right now, because, you could really question whether or not this data is going to be really reflective of the situation on the corridor in the next 2, 3, or 4 years. Leads me to another question. Are you guys working with the Eastland redevelopment folks yet? I know before, the impression I got was that you had been speaking with them, you had reached out to them, et cetera, but that wasn't the case. And I'm wondering, where are we with that?
When you're talking about the development folks, can you be a little more specific on who you're referring to?
Yeah, so I know before you hadn't spoken with the folks in the Economic Development Department. I want to know, have you connected with them? And then certainly the Eastland redevelopment team to make sure that this is something that is conducive to their needs. I mean, we're making a tremendous investment. We're going to make a tremendous investment in that site. Is this something that, have you worked with them, discussed the entirety of your plans with them?
So I'm going to answer that in 2 portions. Number 1, in terms of Gold Line Phase 3, absolutely, we are working with the development staff, and I have actually met with the development team on the Eastland site for a variety of issues. So that is ongoing. In regard to this transit-only lane, we have not talked with the developer of the site because this is a pilot that we're looking for that will go away after 6 months and have very different goals. But again, in regards to the long-term plans for the corridor in relation to Gold Line Phase 3, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I have no more questions. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks, John.
Are there other questions? I think there are no other questions on this from the council. All right. What's next?
Well, I'd like to use the opportunity to say thank you to you for...
I don't think you really mean it. Say it again. Try it again.
You should just get out of here now as fast as you can.
Well, I specifically wanted to express my appreciation for Saturday evening when you all came, especially Mayor Lyles, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Newton, and Councilmember Augustine. Thank you for being with us on Saturday. We had over 500 people came to listen to the comprehensive plan, and that's no exaggeration. We actually were counting them. And as of today, we've been receiving different comments, so people are actually reading them, and that's an encouragement. But I would like you to please send them out to your network, to different folks. We want to hear from everyone. So I wanted to end on a positive note. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ty. It was actually a great experience, so really appreciate that. Okay.
And off he runs.
This is the transportation updates. Now, we have the council committee reports. I think that one of the things that I try to emphasize on the committee reports, we got the documents, and these are really pretty much full-page minutes of every meeting that you have had. And I think that the idea for committee reports was always to bring up those areas where you had uncertainty or where you had decisions that were divided, and that you wanted feedback from the council prior to coming to the meeting with your recommendation. So I think that if everyone has read this, we're okay. But I would love an example of great presentation. So we'll start with our Safe Communities Committee, Mr. Eggleston.
I don't know if it'll be great, but I meant I'll lead with brevity, which
That's
is
great.
Which is that we spent an extensive amount of time talking as a whole council about the Safe Charlotte plan just last week and passed it unanimously. So I will just encourage people to look at the notes that they've been sent, but we have talked about this at length. You should know what's going on. And our next meeting would have been tomorrow, but we're obviously not going to have one on Election Day. So it is Tuesday, November 10th, a week from tomorrow. And I will draw your attention to the fact that those meetings are moving back to their original time slot of noon going forward. That is my presentation.
Can I ask a question about this?
No, ma'am.
Are you, okay, I hear that, so.
Yeah, it took him 27 seconds to say the meeting's next week.
Yes, Madam Mayor, your question.
I think the question is, how is it the data dashboard? Are you going to be getting reports regularly on the updates of those actions that are proceeding as a result of the approval of the document?
Yes, I expect that we will.
Okay.
And if not, then.
Yes, you will.
Okay.
Then we will not have a problem.
All right. Would budget and effectiveness like to go next?
Yes, ma'am. In brief, I'll highlight a couple of things we talked about. The members of the committee are myself as chair and Mayor Pro Tem Isel, then council members Ajmera, Graham, and Johnson. We talked about our code of ethics, initially about the process for conflict of interest and disclosure of conflict of interest. The committee is talking about changing the language in our policy so that it says council members who have a concern about a possible perception of conflict should speak to the city attorney, and if so advised by the city attorney, should notify other members of council about the issue for information. We also talked about the ethics policy and are considering, have not yet taken any action on, are considering a change there, which might involve a referral back to council instead of to outside, an outside investigator or outside counsel. And so that recommendation is still in process, and we expect to bring something back to full council about that. The other thing I would mention is we did actually vote on a recommendation to full council concerning the Charlotte firefighters retirement system. And in very brief terms, the issue there is that the funding for the retirement plan, which is a separate plan for the firefighters away from the state-managed plans, is only at about 77% of the liability. So funding in hand is about $580 million, and the liability is about $758 million. So what is indicated there is that the city take action to increase its contributions to the plan so as not to allow that deficit to get greater and, in fact, to start reducing the unfunded liability. That, in turn, would require a legislative action, and therefore the key components of the vote that we took were to recommend to full council that we step up the contributions to the plan to try to get us more on track with getting it funded properly, and that we include in our legislative agenda the request that legislation be passed indicating that we must step up the contributions. And that will be brought to full council, Mr. Manager.
Next.
So Dana Fenton would, in the action briefing next week, bring the legislative agenda, and with a nod tonight, that would be a part of the legislative agenda.
All right, so the committee voted unanimously that we should adopt this course correction in terms of increasing our funding to the plan, and that we should have on our legislative agenda the request that local legislation be passed. And so I just encourage you to kind of look at that, and if you have questions about it, to inform yourselves, because it will be coming before us for action. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Great neighborhoods.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, you have the information in front of you. I'll just kind of highlight 3 items. One, on our October 21st meeting, we dealt with the issue of short-term rentals in terms of issues we were receiving from the community, and the write-up is in your package for you to review as well. We did take on the topic of source of income discrimination, and staff has went away to do some due diligence on that for us. One is to propose a draft ordinance to score it with strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats, and alternatives, to provide the council a list of cities that have passed laws that prohibit determination based on source of income, recommendations for incentives or educational opportunities through community relations to help mitigate landlord concerns, etc. You can read that for yourself. Staff will be coming back to the committee in December with these tasks to report to the committee. And then lastly, the committee took up the issue of naturally occurring affordable housing rental subsidy program. The committee discussed a proposed NOAA rental subsidy program for tenants, households earning 30% of less than the area median income, who do not currently have a voucher or other forms of rental subsidy. We specifically talked about Lake Mist Apartments, which is a 144-unit NOAA development located in Council District 3. This will be coming before the Council for Action November 9th. And that's my report.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Bakari?
We're going to keep our Intergovernmental Relations Committee update very short, but one of the main items as we keep tracking forward is just procedurally where your committee is with I think the 3 items that, because I think they're still with you perhaps, and how is that going to procedurally flow over the next couple weeks, would you say?
Well, again, there's a committee meeting, and I think you're talking specifically about source of income?
Yeah, there's 3, but that was one.
There's 3. Again, we have a committee meeting, I think this week as well as in December, and then we will be making recommendations out of the committee to the council, and so council will have the last word in terms of how we move forward.
So a couple of things. I want to just make sure. It seems to me that I've been hearing like a committee is saying, well, this needs to happen for us to do this. It needs to go to the legislative committee. I think that has to be a part of the committee report and recommendation to the full council, because it's really the action that's most important that the council agree upon. If you're talking about how it's implemented that requires state action, I guess my question is the syncing of those of the times not working for us? Because
well, from the Intergovernmental Committee perspective, I think we don't have a perspective either way at this point. The thing we don't want to do, and I think the big problem has been for a lot of these topics, we've been waiting to see what happens in the election, because clearly that can have different ramifications for different topics. But putting that aside, what we don't want to do is have them spend a bunch of time in their committee and say, yeah, we want that. It's then come and get referred over to the Intergovernmental Committee where we have our discussion, spend time on it, and then bring it forth to council to then figure out there isn't a broader support for it or there is. So my line of questioning, and I think that's the purpose of you having the committee's updates and the strategy sessions, it's not a status update as much as it's like we're not exactly sure what the will of the body is, and if the will of the body on something like source of income discrimination, for example, or a half dozen other items that we have isn't going to be there, I'd hate to waste a ton of staff time and a bunch of hours in multiple committees kind of bringing it to that point. So that's a problem statement, I know, but that's the one we're trying to figure out.
I think that what I've been told, Mr. Graham, you want to respond on the short-term discrimination, or income source discrimination?
That specifically will be presented to the council or to the committee in December. Staff is doing some due diligence at my request. I want to make sure that all the council members, the committee members, as well as the council as a whole, know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the consequences, both good and bad. So we're going to really take our time and do the homework. That work is coming back to the committee in December, and then one way or another, it'll be referred out to the full council for their consideration. And so I would imagine, council member, by the time we take a break for Christmas, you should know that specifically in others that may or may not need some type of referral from the council to the Governmental Relations Committee for further action.
So, okay, the other thing I wanted to ask about the short-term rentals, I thought that was in planning. Is it in both? What's going on with that?
Well, it came back to us, and Mayor Pro Tem helped me out. She's on the committee as well. We discussed it and felt that we should just continue to kind of do what we were currently doing, which is kind of running in place. Is that a good way to say or a bad way to say it?
I don't want two committees working on.
The reason it ended up in ours is because it'll be part of the UDO.
Okay.
So it'll really be addressed as part of the UDO. And the idea is that some of the complaints that we've gotten recently related to short-term rentals have to do with properties that have been on the Airbnb platform, and Airbnb's been a great partner and have been helping. And that currently we do have code enforcement, and Patrick's looking the other way now. I think that the message was really that we do have what's in place. What's in place right now is okay to deal with the problems that we have seen, and it will be addressed as part of the UDO.
And we just kind of came to a conclusion that what we had in place, as the Mayor Pro Tem has indicated, was working based on the number of complaints we were getting. We're getting complaints, but it's not like it's overwhelming based on what's happening within the city as a whole.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that you're not duplicating.
No, I think we're done with that.
Okay. And then on the rental subsidy program, you said that's up next time. Is this a pilot or something? This is our first one that we've actually had to address a rental subsidy program. So I just wondered how that came up. Is it a part of our NOAA policy? How does this work?
Ms. Weidman may be here, if she can kind of help me out, if she is.
She is
Well,
here.
we can,
Madam Manager?
Do we have to do? Okay. Okay.
We're
You
fine.
mean Fine, and that we're okay just to raise this as a question, or fine what way?
I believe that it would be a part of an RCA for next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wondered if it was just a part of that RCA for the
Yeah.
NOAA.
Okay,
Okay, all right,
we're good.
okay.
And Madam Mayor, Ms. Johnson has a question.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Johnson has a question.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you. I have two questions for Councilmember Graham. First of all, the reentry ordinance, I know the COVID housing task force, we were presented with information about the source of income discrimination and also the reentry ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Did not see that in the outstanding issues for the committee, so I just wanted to know if you could give me an update, or give us an update on the reentry ordinance.
It's on the future agenda for the committee before the end of the year.
Okay, good, okay. And then secondly, and maybe we can talk about this next week, but the NOAA, the pilot for Lake Mist, I did have an opportunity to speak with Mark, and it's an exciting model, and I'm hoping we can mirror that for other projects in the future as an incentive for developers who'd like to develop 30% housing. And I know that Pam will go into detail next week, but it's a really exciting pilot and solution.
I can't wait until next week. It's going to be an exciting presentation, and I think there will be a number of good conversation around that particular topic. So next week, I think we'll dive right into it and be a lot more specific in terms of what the direction we're going there and what this may mean for other projects throughout the city.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Graham. Intergovernmental is a very short presentation. I'm sorry. Are you ready, Mr. Bakari? Yes. Intergovernmental.
Thank you. I'll start. We don't really need to recap all the stuff you can read for yourself. So, Mr. Winston, do you have anything to add?
All the referrals for the legislative agenda are in your packet. Mr. Fenton will be doing a deep dive into that next Monday. I think we had a couple of referrals in there. Nothing that has come out that I think needs necessary deep dive discussion tonight.
End of report.
Any questions for Mr. Bakari? Okay, thank you. So the next report, tap with an E on it. Tap E.
Yeah.
Tap E, okay.
So my report is only 9 pages long. I'll read it really quickly. We did have a very full meeting on September 28th, and my committee members are Mr. Eggleston, Mr. Winston, who am I forgetting? Mr. Driggs, and Mr. Newton. And we started out with the comprehensive plan, and Taiwo and Alicia gave us an update along with the consultants on the big ideas and the draft policies for the next steps for the comprehensive plan. And as Taiwo mentioned, they had a great kickoff on October 30th, on Saturday, over at the Park Expo. So thanks for everybody who did come. There was a really good turnout, and it was a really creative way to do it in the middle of a pandemic. So thanks to the staff who put that all together. The kickoff on Saturday really opens the 6-month review period. And as you know, council will be set to adopt this as a policy in April, although it's it's a moving document, so there's always going to be room for improvements, but this next 6 months are going to be really critical for council to really understand what's in the document and to share it with people in the community. We then talked about the tree canopy action plan, and Allison Craig and Tim Porter gave us a presentation on the recent engagement efforts and peer city analysis that have been done, along with preliminary canopy policies. So as we know, our tree canopy has declined over the past few years. It was at 49% coverage in 2012. It's now down to 45%. A lot of the loss has been in residential areas due in part to infill, but also to storms. South Charlotte has seen the most loss, and 65% of the tree canopy loss has occurred in single-family residential areas. The high-level takeaway from this whole analysis was that our tree canopy is aging, storms are making an impact on our canopy, and maintenance of our canopy is inadequate, inequitable, and basically needs a lot of work. We also, from the peer city analysis, Tim said that they took a look at Raleigh, Austin, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C., and most of those cities have, in comparison to Charlotte, have a higher mitigation in lieu fee charge for developers that don't want to, that would rather just pay the fee. And they charge for impacts that Charlotte currently does not regulate. Some of the peer cities had programs that support assistance with maintenance and replanting, and we need to the recommendation is that we really need to increase support for our low-income neighborhoods with replanting and maintenance of their tree canopy. With regards to our lower-income neighborhoods, they looked at our previously redlined communities, and those neighborhoods received a grade of Ds, whereas predominantly white neighborhoods received grades of As for our tree canopy. So this, again, also points to the inequity, and it also brings up the point that there's a temperature difference between those neighborhoods, whereas predominantly white neighborhoods are cooler in the summer than African-American communities. So that's obviously a point that kept coming up that we need to work on. We need funding for proactive public tree care, as well as more stringent tree protection measures. And the next steps are to refine the tree canopy policy and draft an ordinance concept for the UDO, and expand the partnership with UNCC to model and project canopy goals and update our urban forest master plan. We had a presentation from John Lewis and John Howard regarding the update on the transit-oriented development study for the Silver Line corridor. And the purpose of that study was really to integrate land use and transportation planning early in the process. It was an opportunity to take the lessons learned from the Blue Line and incorporate those as missed opportunities in the Blue Line, make sure that we don't miss those opportunities again with the Silver Line, particularly as it involves affordable housing, bike lanes, pedestrian crossings, and how do we mitigate displacement of residents along that rail line. Let's see, that was it. And then our next steps are for the TOD Silver Line is that the MTC will look at adoption, as we heard from John, in March of 2021. So that was it. The packet, which I know everybody's going to read thoroughly, says the next meeting's on November 21st. That's a Saturday, so that's not it. It's marked as November 23rd, but we've just decided not to have a council meeting that day. It's a Monday, so it's we'll have to TBD to figure out when we're going to have our next meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions for the Mayor Pro Tem?
We just thank you for shaving that one page off for us, Mayor Pro Tem.
Ms. Ashmere has a question.
Are there any other questions about the committee?
Ms. Ashmere has a question.
I'm sorry, Ms. Ashmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for the report.
Thank you for caring, Ms. Ashmira.
Yeah, for the tree canopy, did committee look at the net zero or a no net loss policy?
No, the focus was really on redistribution of the tree canopy. And so that would provide opportunities to say where we would increase if it was a no net loss. They're leaving it as 50 by 2050 as the goal. And so the focus was really on how do we redistribute the tree canopy and increase it in areas that don't have canopy, and that would be more of our lower income neighborhoods.
Understood. So I know at some point when we review our tree ordinance, as we revise or as we go through the UDO process, this no net loss policy would be reviewed at a later point?
Well, I think it can be discussed at any point. They're not, the goal is to, the goal would be not to lose anything more, but we are losing it at a faster rate than they can really control right now. And part of that has got to be looking at more stringent regulations than we have on the books right now. And so the focus in this meeting was really on looking at reporting out the peer analysis. There was no recommendation at this point. That would be, they're still working on that.
Oh, got it. Okay. Well, I look forward to the recommendation. I just wanted us to look at that whenever that comes up. As Mayor Pro Tem, you know that the challenge we are having is that we are not able to keep up. Whatever, for an example, we are getting in our preservation fund, we are not able to protect the same acreage somewhere else. And that's why we are continuing to lose more ground every single day.
Yeah.
So other cities have implemented that, and I hope that at some point the committee will look at that. But I do appreciate the work in terms of the equity, because when we have neighborhoods where some neighborhoods, especially in communities of color, where we have who gets to enjoy tree canopy and who gets to enjoy the shade, it shouldn't be based on the income. So I certainly appreciate the work there.
All right, any other questions for the Mayor Pro Tem? I think that covers all of our committee reports. Mr. Jones, do you have any? I'm sorry. Mr. Bakari?
Business and workforce development?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Workforce and Business
Oh,
Development.
I am so sorry. The Vice Chair, I'm sorry. Mr. Mitchell is not able to join us tonight, so Mr. Bakari will give the Workforce Development report.
There's a lot of stuff that you can read there. I'd pay special attention to the updates on the Open for Business initiative and where we stand there. I think the two things for everyone to consider as we're kind of at a point where we're switching gears for the future is, one, as we've been working closer with the county with these joint meetings of the ED groups, what do we all want that to achieve? Because I think the committees working together are starting to bear some fruit, and now we need to decide what some topics are that we might want to broach. So I just plant that seed in everyone's mind, as well as it's time for us to really start seriously planning what 2021 looks like in the post-COVID kind of economic recovery model. And I think as you see all these stats and Open for Business and what that has accomplished with Survive and Thrive in the kind of, mid-pandemic time, as we're going to a post-pandemic new normal, I think we need to consider what that next phase of a Revive initiative looks like. And I don't know that we've really given that a ton of thought yet, because we've been so focused on the granular nature of this year. So again, just wanted to plant those two seeds.
All right. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Bakari?
Motion to close.
All right, so we have a motion and a closed motion. Anyone else from the virtual world? All right, so everybody
vote.
Get out the vote. See everybody out at the polls tomorrow, somewhere, somehow, helping people get elected. Which is the election?